Jon Snow's return from the cold grasp of death had been an astonishment to everyone at Castle Black. Even he, standing on legs that still quivered with the memory of oblivion, could not fully believe it. The sharp air of the north stung his lungs as he stepped out into the courtyard, Melisandre by his side. Her red robes fluttered in the wind, and she was gazing at him with an intensity that frightened him more than the glare of his black brothers or the memory of the mutineers who had driven their daggers into his body. That morning, as he inhaled the first breath of new life, he had believed himself forever changed. Now a heavier possibility coiled in Melisandre's eyes, and he watched her closely. She had told him she had seen more in the flames, glimpses of other souls waiting in darkness, bound to the same oath of duty and love that he carried in his breast. Jon could hardly understand how it might be possible, but the glimmer in her eyes, that fierce glow of the red god, gave him a shudder. He had told her no, had insisted that what was done to him needn't be done to anyone else, that the Lord of Light was either cruel or supremely mysterious, but either way the power should not be toyed with further. But Melisandre had not listened. Or, at least, she had not obeyed him. That very same afternoon, as the wind howled around the ramparts and Ghost pressed close to Jon's leg with a throaty whine, Melisandre had disappeared into her chambers. She emerged after sunset, face pale under the dancing shadows of the torchlight, to speak to Jon again. "There's more to be done," she told him. "Your story, your destiny, it isn't only yours. The North remembers Jon Snow. They cry out to the Lord of Light. And in the flames I have seen them." He stared uncomprehending. "Who have you seen?" "Your father. Your brother. Your lady mother. The Wolf King who died at the Twins. They are waiting, drifting in darkness, but I feel them, near. Perhaps near enough that I can call them back." Jon felt his heart clench in his chest. The memory of Robb's death was still a wound that cut deep. He had known the stories, had heard of the Red Wedding. Lady Catelyn's despair, her madness and cruel murder. Ned Stark's head on a spike in King's Landing. How often had Jon awakened from nightmares of that very image? To see them again seemed impossible, a blasphemy even more terrifying than his own return. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I don't want you to do this," Jon said softly. "We don't know what they'll be if they come back. We don't know if they'll come back as themselves or something else." Melisandre's dark eyes hardened. "Death is an enemy. The Night King's horde rises. The war for the dawn is upon us, and I have seen that only the might of the North, united, can stand a chance. The Starks are the heart of the North. Their presence may rally great houses that have fallen into doubt or into dark alliances. Let me try. For the sake of all who live." Jon wrestled with his conscience. He had no desire to see his family used as living weapons. That was how he felt, deep inside, that Melisandre's attempts to raise the dead were always in service to some grand cosmic plan, not in service to the souls themselves. And yet, he could not deny what she had done for him. She had pulled him back from the darkness, from a final emptiness that still flickered in his memory. If she truly had the power to reunite him with the father and brother he had loved, to bring Lady Catelyn back, perhaps Sansa and Arya would not have to fight alone. Perhaps the North would have a chance to be whole again. He looked into Melisandre's eyes and read unstoppable zeal. He nodded, heavy with regret, hope, and dread. "If this is truly the Lord of Light's will," he said, voice shaking, "do it, but don't harm them. And if something is wrong, if they come back wrong, we lay them to rest again." Melisandre's scarlet lips parted into a small, secretive smile. "As you say," she murmured, "they shall remain unharmed. And if I cannot bring them back truly, the Lord of Light will guide me." It was decided, though Jon's heart quailed with the enormity of it. They had the remains of Ned Stark, carried from King's Landing by Yoren and then eventually returned north. Robb Stark's body was said to be desecrated, the head of his direwolf sewn onto his shoulders, but some pieces remained at the Twins, taken away in hushed sorrow by those loyal to the young Wolf King. Lady Catelyn's corpse, cast into the river, had once stirred rumors of a vengeful wraith calling herself Lady Stoneheart. But if the rumors were true or not, Melisandre's eyes glowed with a confidence that she could find what was left. Bone or dust, she claimed all that truly mattered was the soul, and the soul was near. She would go to them, gather them into her secret workings, and attempt a miracle that even Thuras of Myr had only once accomplished beyond a single dead man. Jon wanted to accompany her, but she forbade it. "I must go alone, or with only those I choose," she said. "The flames require solitude, Yet if I succeed, you will know. She set out that very night from Castle Black with a small retinue of guards. Davos, grim-faced and unsettled, insisted on going. Jon stayed behind, deeply torn. Tormund Giantsbane offered to go, too, though he did so more out of some begrudging sense that the Red Woman was intriguing than any real faith. But Melisandre refused Tormund. She wanted men who did not question the Lord of Light's path, or at least men who would not disrupt her spells. When she was gone, Jon was left in a realm of uneasy waiting, an entire fortnight passing under the shifting skies as the snows began to thin in the approach of a northern spring. Word reached him by Raven that Melisandre had traveled to the Neck, then to the Riverlands, collecting whatever remained of the fallen Starks, or so the letter implied. Davos's few words conveyed no optimism nor despair, only that they continued to move, guided by the Red Woman's visions. Then all letters stopped. Jon went about the day-to-day business of reorganizing the Night's Watch, punishing his murderers, and reevaluating his vow. He had died after all, which many claimed released him from his sworn oath. But he could not quite abandon the mission yet. Not while the White Walkers lurked beyond the wall. Not while the North still needed every sword it could gather. Even if he was free in the eyes of the oath, he was not free in his heart. He still had duties to the realm. It was nearly a moon's turn later, just as the gloom of another night pressed upon the ramparts, that Jon heard the horns blow 3 times outside Castle Black. "Riders!" came the cry from above. He rushed out to the courtyard, Ghost padding at his heels, to see the gates opening. Torches spat orange flames into the swirling night wind. Davos entered first, grim and haggard. Behind him came Melisandre, her red cloak caked with mud and snow, hair unbound, face drawn. 4 men walked behind her carrying what appeared to be stretchers draped with thick furs. Jon's heart hammered in his chest at the sight, tears nearly blinding him as he rushed forward. He lifted the corner of the first fur. Underneath lay fragments of bone and half-fleshed remains that made him gag. Was that some part of his father's skull? He recoiled, and Davos clamped a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, lad," he said in a low, sorrowful voice. But the Red Woman insisted these were the bones of Ned Stark. She recognized them by, well, she says her god told her. A few fragments from the crypts as well, things your brother or mother touched. I can't claim I know everything she did, but she believes it'll be enough. Jon's voice shook with horror. Bones? They're just bones. He almost expected to see a triumphant gleam in Melisandre's eyes, but instead she looked burdened, as though the weight of it had hollowed her. She touched his shoulder, and her hand was surprisingly cold for a woman named the Red Witch. "Bones and flesh are the domain of the Father above and the stranger," she said softly, "but the breath of life belongs to the Lord of Light. Whether he bestows it or not, we shall see. But if we do not try, the North will stand alone, fractured. Come, we must begin at once." The men brought the remains inside, placing them reverently in a carefully sealed chamber at Castle Black that Melisandre had prepared. The air stank of incense and fat-drenched torches. Jon swallowed his revulsion as Melisandre demanded that all others but Davos remain outside. She included Jon in that edict as well. "You, least of all, should stand watch. This magic is best performed in secret. I allowed you to witness your own return because you had to live it. But these souls, I must speak with them alone first. Once they awaken, if the Lord is kind, I will call for you." Jon's lips parted in protest. He wanted to be at their side if it worked. He wanted to see if it was truly them from the first breath. But a quiet voice reminded him that when he had died, there had been nothing but darkness. If these resurrected souls needed space or time to find themselves, perhaps it was best for them not to see him in those first moments. He gave a short nod and backed out of the chamber. He stood outside the heavy door, his breath ragged and unknown dread eating at him. Hours passed. He paced the cold corridor, refusing to sleep. Men came and went, nodding politely, not quite meeting his eyes. His return from the dead had already set tongues wagging. Another half-dozen resurrected Starks would truly upend the world. He braced for it, the cold stone walls pressing in on him. Ghost settled at his feet, occasionally letting out a quiet huff, an echo of Jon's own tension. Finally, after what seemed half the night, the door grated open. Melisandre stepped out, sweat beading her pale forehead, her hair limp and damp. Davos followed, ashen-faced. "Come," Melisandre whispered. "Come see." Jon walked in. At first, he was certain the ceremony had failed. The remains still lay on the slabs, half-covered in furs. The reek of death and the sharp tang of spices filled the air so thickly he nearly choked. But Melisandre motioned for him to look closer. She knelt beside the largest grouping of bones and placed her hand upon them. Then she looked up at John with a fierce and terrible smile. Under the furs, something moved. It was just a slow, shuddering shift, bones scraping against bone, flesh knitting from some unseen source of power. John felt himself tremble. This was a darker and more harrowing magic than what he had experienced. His own memory of returning from death had not included watching his body piece itself back together. He had simply awakened with new breath. Here, it was as if time itself reversed within the confines of rotted bones and tattered skin. He could not tear his eyes away even as nausea rose within him. It took hours more, and even in that time, little truly recognizable formed. Melisandre sank into a kind of trance, chanting words in a language that made John's ears burn. Finally, she slumped to the floor, eyes rolling back. Davos rushed to her side, propping her up. John leaned in, heart-hammering, to see whether the bones still moved. Then he heard a ragged inhalation like a newborn's first cry, except it came from one of the piles. That sound jolted him backward in alarm. He saw a pair of eyes, blue-gray, stark eyes, staring at him from a half-formed face. John nearly cried out. Slowly, fingers took shape and then a trembling torso, raw and new like the skin of a newborn babe. He recognized the broad shoulders. They reminded him of the statue in the crypts of Winterfell. He realized with a jolt that he was looking at Eddard Stark, who had once been the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. But the face was younger than John remembered in his childhood. The lines of care and sorrow that had haunted Ned Stark's last days seemed reduced, leaving a quieter, sterner visage that echoed the father John recalled from the vantage of a small boy. John sank to his knees, tears threatening. He whispered, "Father, is that you?" A trembling, unsteady voice came from that raw throat. "John?" John bent low, though he was still afraid to touch the man. "I'm here," he whispered. Ned Stark's eyes slid shut and he sucked in a breath, pained but triumphant. "I heard you call me father," he murmured in a rasp. "Have I awakened in the afterlife?" "My mind is." "I remember the black cells in King's Landing, a sword," he swallowed hard. "I remember the moment I died. And now, I see you. You look so much older than the boy I left behind." Tears flickered at the corners of Ned's new eyes. "I do not understand." Before John could answer, motion rippled from another of the tables. He looked up, half-panicked, as he saw a tall figure forming from the gathering swirl of half-flesh. He recognized the shape of the direwolf's snarl, the ghost of a wolf's head where a human head should be, but that seemed to dissolve into flesh, replaced by the visage of Robb Stark. The color of his hair was still a wet, dark red, sticking to his brow as though drenched in blood. His eyes flickered open. In that gaze, there was confusion, pain, and an echo of the proud and resolute young man John had once called brother. Robb inhaled sharply, as though he had never taken a breath before. The air whistled through newly formed lungs. With each second, his body came into clearer relief, the broad chest, the strong arms, the old scars from training mishaps. But he was quiet, uncertain, blinking in the torchlight. Beside him, the shape on the third table stirred. John recognized Lady Catelyn's auburn hair, though it was tangled with dark streaks. Her face was contorted as if still in the throes of a silent scream. John felt his hands shake. He recalled the stories of her final shriek when she beheld Robb's murder at the Red Wedding. Now she came back to life, hair plastered to her skull, an echo of that agony etched across her brow. Yet as she drew a breath, the lines of torment eased, recast into a still troubled quiet. She turned her head toward Robb, recognized him, and let out a gasp filled with astonishment and heartbreak. John could hardly breathe. He hadn't even noticed that two other smaller bundles were likewise regenerating. He started in shock when he realized one was Rickon, the little boy who had been lost and rumored dead. Now his hair sprouted in dark tangles, eyes wide, the face of a child forging itself into something older in seconds. The last form was a woman as thin and sorrowful as a ghost, Lyanna Stark. At least, that was the only conclusion John could reach as he stared at a swirl of dark hair and a face that was heartbreakingly lovely, its features reminiscent of Arya and Sansa both. She moved, chest fluttering, her arms trembling as though every muscle was new and uncertain. John felt tears burn his eyes, almost disbelieving that this miracle went so far as to pluck Ned Stark's sister from beyond the grave after all these years. How had Melisandre found her remains? The crypts, perhaps, though father had always said that she was entombed there. Indeed, he realized with a shock that the riddle of Rhaegar Targaryen and the Tower of Joy might yet come to the forefront again if Lyanna was truly here. Amid the swirl of confusion, Ned's voice rasped a little louder, as if stirring to protect his revived family. "John, my son, what has happened here? This is not possible." His gaze turned to Melisandre, who was half unconscious in Davos's arms. Who is she? Jon swallowed hard. Her name is Melisandre, a priestess of the Lord of Light. She brought me back from the dead, and now she has brought all of you back as well. Robb struggled upright, wincing at the strain of forming sinews. A pang of grief lit his eyes. I remember the twins, he said. My men butchered. Grey wind, my head, he touched his neck as if verifying it was all in place. He exhaled shakily. Mother, are you truly? Catelyn, hardly able to move for shock, reached out to him, her eyes brimming. My boy, she whispered. I remember the feeling of the knife. My throat, the agony, the water pulling me down. Fresh tears slid down her cheeks. And I remember hatred burning in my chest. A darkness. But now, oh gods. She turned to Ned, and the sight of him robbed her of breath. He looked younger, but still so unmistakably her husband. A strangled sob escaped her as she flung herself toward him, clutching at his shoulders. She pressed her face against his neck as if to confirm that he was real. Ned pulled her tight, tears streaming down his cheeks too. Jon felt compelled to look at Lyanna, uncertain of what to say. Her eyes flickered, searching the chamber. What year is this? She managed in a whisper. Where's Brandon? Where's Ricard? Ned closed his eyes. They're gone, Lyanna. They've been gone for a long time. You died at the Tower of Joy. His gaze broke with a mixture of sorrow and confusion. I never thought, oh, Lya. He looked stricken, as if the memory were cutting deeper than any blade. Lyanna's expression flickered with old sorrow. Perhaps glimpses of Targaryen princes. Perhaps regrets unspoken. Yet she seemed too weak to dredge the words forth. She only shivered, hugging herself as though hoping to push away the memories. While they huddled in shock, Rickon let out a cry, half wild, startling them all. Shaggy Og, he yelled, the memory of his direwolf snapping through his mind. Then his eyes darted about, uncomprehending. Robb? Mother? Father? Jon? Where's Shaggy Og? The heartbreak in his voice was the heartbreak of a boy who had never truly grown up. Sorrow and confusion clashed across his features as he realized his beloved wolf would not appear. Jon moved to Rickon's side and put a hand on his younger brother's trembling shoulder. Easy, Jon murmured. We'll sort it all out. All around them, the newly resurrected Starks drew breath, arms pulling furs around their fragile new flesh. The chill air of the north was punishing. Jon yelled for Maester Aemon's old quarters to be prepared for the thickest cloaks and warmest stews. In a flurry of movement, the Black brothers who could stomach what was happening rushed to help. Some stood back, crossing themselves in dread, muttering about unnatural magic. But the unstoppable truth remained, the Starks had returned. Days passed as the five of them, Ned, Catelyn, Robb, Rickon, and Lyanna recovered. Melisandre was near catatonic for a day, rousing only to sip water that Davos forced on her. As soon as she could stand, she locked herself away in solitary prayer, disclaiming any part in the events, repeating only that the Lord of Light had willed it. Jon's time was consumed with explaining the upheaval of the world to the once dead. The Starks learned of Robert's rebellion, the War of the Five Kings, the fate of Joffrey, and the madness of King's Landing. Ned struggled with heartbreak as Jon told him of Sansa's marriage to Tyrion, then to Ramsay, of Arya's disappearance, of the Boltons holding Winterfell. Robb's face hardened with each new detail. Gone was the idealistic young king. In his place rose a quiet, seething man who had learned the bitter lessons of betrayal and death. Catelyn hovered near them, half in sorrow, half in determination. She had to know about her two younger daughters. She demanded over and over again, "Where's Arya? Where's my sweet girl?" But no one had answers. And of course, she wept with relief to hear that Sansa lived, though under horrific circumstances. Rickon looked lost, still boyish, though he aged in those days, something in his face setting into lines of grief and anger at the knowledge of his wolf's death and the years stolen from him. As for Lyanna, learning that she had been entombed for nearly 2 decades was disorienting, but the truth that stung her most was that Robert Baratheon had become king after the downfall of the Targaryens. She listened with parted lips as Ned described the end of the Mad King, the eventual rebellion that crowned Robert, and how Robert's hatred of Targaryens had shaped the realm's destiny. Lyanna asked after Rhaegar Targaryen once, voice trembling, and Ned only shook his head, eyes haunted. Jon could sense unspoken secrets between them, but no one dared crack open that old chest of knowledge, not yet. In the quiet hours, Ned found time to speak to Jon. They stood on the ramparts, gazing out at the dark beyond the wall. Jon's cloak snapped in the wind, and Ned's cloak, borrowed from one of the Night's Watch, hung around him in ill fit. "I must ask you, Jon," Ned said softly, clearing his throat. "When I died in King's Landing, I thought I had failed everyone. My daughters were hostages, Sansa forced to betroth that monster Joffrey, Arya lost in the streets. Robb marched south and was destroyed. Winterfell fell to the Ironborn. And you he swallowed. I suppose I hoped you had found peace at the wall, but you found only your own death. Yet you stand here, alive, as are we all, by some miracle. Tell me, have you learned anything of your mother? Jon stiffened. Even now, the words to answer that question were tangled in the confusion of rumor, letters from Sam, cryptic stories from old men. Ned had always told him he would speak of his mother when Jon next saw him, but that day never came. Now it had come in this most unnatural way. Father. I don't know who my mother was, Jon said, half-lie. Some say it might be Willa or Asheridan or... I don't know. He struggled. The truth had been swirling in his mind since Sam's discovery in the Citadel's records or since that haunting dream of the Tower of Joy. But the final confirmation he had yearned for was here, alive, walking again. Yet Ned was silent, only turning to stare out into the gloom. Jon felt the moment pass. He suspected that if anyone truly knew, it might be Lyanna herself. Crows circled overhead and the chill in the air seemed to intensify. The threat of the White Walkers loomed beyond that great ice barrier. Ned's gaze roamed the horizon as though searching for answers. The world has changed, he murmured. We were brought back. I can't imagine why, except that maybe we are meant to do something to save our people. The North. Our children. Jon nodded. The army of the dead marches beyond the wall. We must unite the North if we hope to stand. But the Boltons hold Winterfell now. Sansa escaped from Ramsay Bolton. I'm not sure where she is at this moment. She was traveling, I think, with Brienne of Tarth. That was the last message I received. Arya's whereabouts are unknown, though rumors say she's somewhere across the sea in Braavos. Bran, Jon's voice caught. Bran's alive, I think. Beyond the wall. He ventured with companions to find something. A three-eyed raven. I know little else. Ned pressed his eyes shut. My family scattered like leaves in a storm, he whispered. And yet somehow we are here. We must gather them. Reclaim our home. Stand against the coming darkness. Something said in Ned's expression, something resolute and comforting. Jon realized that, living or dead, his father's sense of honor and duty was unshaken. Over the next few days, the newly risen Starks gained strength, ate hearty meals, and clothed themselves in black furs and leathers. Robb spent hours in the training yard, reacquainting himself with the sword. It took time for his new muscles to move fluidly, but soon he swung a blade with much of the old skill he had possessed. As for Catelyn, she moved among the men with the quiet dignity of a lady, though the haunted flicker in her eyes never fully left. She remained gentle, yet there was a steel beneath her courtesy. She would not let her children be taken from her again. Lyanna was the quietest of them all, still grappling with a world that had changed drastically. She avoided questions about Rhaegar or her final moments. Rickon followed Robb like a small shadow, quietly absorbing everything with wide eyes. But sometimes in the courtyard he would sit by Ghost, running his hands through the direwolf's fur and murmuring Shaggy Dog's name under his breath. At last, a plan took shape. Word had spread that the Lord Commander, once Lord Commander, Jon Snow was no longer bound to the Night's Watch, that the resurrected Starks now stood at Castle Black. The wild rumor reached the scattered northern houses, reached Sansa in her travels, reached the ears of Wyman Manderly, the Umbers, and others who had once sworn fealty to Winterfell. Jon felt uneasy about the stares of the Black brothers, many of whom seemed ready to chase out these unnatural figures. But no open hostility manifested, perhaps because they feared crossing the man who had returned from death once already. Melisandre's presence also kept them at bay. Robb grew restless. We must go home, he insisted to the family in the common hall. The Boltons sit in our father's seat. Ramsay Bolton is a monster. If I had my men, I'd march at once. He paused, remembering that his men had all been slaughtered at the Twins, that the loyal bannermen had been scattered or killed. He swallowed. But we can't allow them to keep it any longer. Winterfell is ours. Ned agreed quietly, though he placed a hand on his resurrected son's shoulder. We must gather the North to us. Another war must be fought, but not only for vengeance. The true war is beyond the wall. We need to unify the region first. Only then can we turn our eyes northward and make a stand. If the White Walkers come, we cannot be divided. They planned their approach. Jon, free of his vow by death, would ride with them to speak to the northern lords. A raven flew out to the wilds in search of Sansa or any sign of her. Another pair of ravens soared north, hoping to find Bran if he was near some outpost of the free folk or if the children of the forest might somehow pass on a message. The Stark family prepared to march. When the day came, they emerged from Castle Black astride borrowed horses, their few retinue wearing the Stark sigil stitched in haste upon black cloaks. It was a meager show compared to the once glorious host of Robb Stark, but at its head rode Eddard Stark himself, with Catelyn at his side. Robb, Rickon, and Lyanna followed, and then Jon Snow, along with Davos, Tormund, who had decided that traveling with a family of resurrected wolves might be a once-in-a-lifetime tale worth telling, and a smattering of loyal fighters. Melisandre lingered behind at Castle Black, still recovering from her exertions. She claimed that she must gaze further into the flames for signs of the White Walkers' next moves. Their departure from the wall was a quiet affair. The few watchers on the ramparts gawked or pretended not to see them. The wind was sharp, but once they crossed into the north proper, it was as if every league turned rumor into reality. The Starks have risen. The Stark banners move again. The roads were still muddy from melting snows. Every village they passed gaped in awe, some kneeling, some crossing themselves at the sight of dead men riding. Yet in many hearts, hope flared anew. They angled for Bear Island first, guided by Davos's counsel that the Mormonts were among the staunchest Stark loyalists. The journey took them over rough terrain. They weathered rains that hammered their small party. Robb, still flush with the energy of new life, kept pressing them onward faster than might have been wise. But Ned admonished him to be measured and patient, a caution that once again shaped the older father-young king dynamic. Robb tried to rein in his eagerness, glancing often at his mother, who rode behind them quietly, the color slowly returning to her cheeks day by day. When they finally arrived at Bear Island's gates, they were met with a tense greeting. The Mormonts had lost so much. Lady Meage Mormont, or her daughter Lyanna Mormont, had taken leadership. As the gates opened and the retinue was ushered in, the small, fierce young girl who was Lady of Bear Island stood waiting in the courtyard. She wore a stern expression that belied her few years. Her watchers, men and women in bear sigils, stood armed at her flank. Lyanna Mormont's voice was clear and uncompromising. "We have heard the rumors," she said, "but I did not dare believe them. They say Eddard Stark rides again, and Robb Stark with him, and Catelyn Tully, and a woman claiming to be Lyanna Stark. They say Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, is there too, living after death. This is some sorcery, is it not? Or are you wights come from beyond the wall?" Ned dismounted. Despite having spent only a short while in his new flesh, he carried himself with quiet authority. He bowed his head to Lyanna Mormont. "My lady, you speak with the bravery of your house. I am Eddard Stark, once Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell. I have returned by the will of the Lord of Light, though I barely understand it myself. We mean no harm to you or your people. We only ask that you stand with us as we prepare to reclaim Winterfell from the Boltons and, beyond that, defend the realm against the true threat from the far north." She eyed him. "You look younger than I expected, Lord Stark," she said. "My mother spoke of you as a man older, wearier." Ned managed a small, wry smile. Death has a way of washing away some years, though it leaves other scars behind. The fierce girl studied each face. Robb, who bore such a striking resemblance to the old portraits of his grandfather Rickard Stark. Rickon, his big eyes shining with leftover boyish innocence. Catelyn, who nodded gravely. Lyanna Stark, quiet and uncertain. And finally Jon Snow, who tried to stand in the corner of the courtyard with minimal attention. A hush hung in the air until Lyanna Mormont, cunning for her age, said, "If you are truly Ned Stark, tell me something only he would know." Ned dipped his head, thinking. Then he lowered his voice and spoke of Meage Mormont's oath of fealty during Robert's rebellion, of how he had marched with her and had once saved her from a band of outlaws near the White Knife. Details that only Eddard Stark could know. Lyanna Mormont's eyes flickered with recognition, for her mother had told her these stories in private. Her posture relaxed. She gave a nod. "Bear Island knows no king but the king in the north whose name is Stark," she said. "And if Eddard Stark stands here, come back from death to unite us, who am I to refuse?" A wave of relief coursed through Jon, and he saw similar relief in the eyes of Robb and the others. They had done it, they had won Bear Island. Even if the rest of the north needed further persuasion, this was a start. The Mormonts offered them hospitality. Over hot stew and bread, the Starks exchanged stories with the small garrison. Lady Lyanna Mormont listened with rapt attention to the tales of White Walkers, the massing threat. She pledged her small but fierce fighting force to the cause. When Eddard Stark rose from the table that evening, he looked more confident than Jon had yet seen him in his second life. He clasped his resurrected son on the shoulder. "We will gather more allies," he said. "One by one, we will do this." From Bear Island they rode to the Rills to speak with House Ryswell. They found a mixed reception. The Ryswells had complicated ties by marriage, and they regarded the dead returning to life with suspicion. Yet the presence of Eddard Stark, beloved by so many of the North's old guard, softened hearts. Catelyn's skill at negotiation also proved invaluable. Gradually, they peeled away uncertain allegiances. House Serwyn, House Tallheart, House Glover. The news spread like wildfire. The Starks have returned. And not just one, but many, risen from the grave. Some cried it was a sign from the old gods themselves. Others insisted it was Red God trickery. But as the Boltons grew ever more despised, the lesser lords found new courage to rally. Tensions flared, of course. Many refused to believe or to bend the knee, especially as Lord Roose Bolton had sealed alliances with the Freys. But the tide was turning. For every holdfast that shut its gates, 2 more opened them to proclaim fealty to House Stark. Before long, the Resurrected family had the makings of an army, smaller than Robb's old host, but brimming with righteous fervor. Ned and Catelyn spent their nights planning strategy, while Robb drilled the recruits in the day, quickly falling back into the role of a commander. Rickon observed wide-eyed, volunteering to learn the sword, though Ned insisted he take it slow. Lyanna Stark kept her counsel quiet, though on occasion, Jon caught her looking at him with a thoughtful gaze that suggested she knew more than she revealed. As they approached Winterfell, a hush of awe descended on the host. The ancient seat of House Stark stood proud against the horizon, although blackened from the damage wrought by Theon Greyjoy's brief occupation and the subsequent retaking by the Boltons. Snow still clung to the ramparts, the moat iced over. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Life still thrived within, but it was a twisted presence. Ramsay Bolton was rumored to be within, though no one knew for sure if Roose Bolton still lived or if his own son had betrayed him. The Bolton banners snapped in the winter wind from the battlements. Seeing that Phil Flay symbol made Catelyn's face twist in revulsion. Ned gazed upon it with a solemn anger, a fury so deep it burned in the quiet lines of his face. They set up camp some distance away, on a ridge with good vantage. Tormund took a group of free folk to scout. By twilight, they returned with information that the gates were barred, the walls heavily manned. Many of the men were fearsome Bolton soldiers, but their morale wavered. The rumor that the Starks had returned haunted them, especially as the word spread that Eddard Stark himself led the rebel host, as though the stories of a vengeful ghost had come to fruition. "We should storm the castle at dawn," Robb insisted. "They can't have more than 1,000 men in there. We have twice that. With surprise and the love of the North, we can take them." But Ned shook his head, setting down the map he'd been studying. "A siege would be wiser. Fewer needless deaths. Winterfell is our home. I will not see it damaged further if we can avoid it. Besides, if Ramsay is within, he is cunning, cruel. We do not know what traps he has laid." He glanced to Catelyn, who nodded in agreement, though the anguish in her eyes betrayed her desire to see justice done upon the man who had tormented her daughters. Night fell, and the Stark camp prepared for a siege come dawn. Jon stood near the warming fires, gazing at the walls. He felt the weight of the Valyrian steel sword, Longclaw, at his hip, a gift from Jeor Mormont. Ghost prowled at his side. Ned approached him, quiet. "Jon," he said softly, "whatever your birth, whatever mysteries remain, you are a Stark in my eyes. When we retake our home, you shall have a place there." Jon's heart constricted. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "All I ever wanted was to be part of the family." Ned nodded. Then he placed a firm hand on Jon's shoulder. "I was never good with words, especially about you. But know this, if the gods have given me a second chance, I will not fail you again." They clasped forearms, father and son, both understanding that more needed to be said, but war was at hand. As dawn broke gray and cold, the Stark's army arrayed itself in front of Winterfell's gates. Horns echoed across the field, answered by the shrill blasts from the walls. Men in Bolton livery paced nervously, crossbows bristling from the ramparts. The flayed man banner drooped in the still morning air. Eddard Stark rode forth, flanked by Robb and Jon, with the rest of the family behind, banners depicting the dire wolf once more flying beside them. That was the moment the defenders truly saw. Ned Stark, thought dead for years, upright and very much alive, Robb Stark, the young wolf who had been murdered at the Red Wedding, Lady Catelyn, who had been thrown into the river that day. A tremor of fear spread along the walls. Some men gasped. Others turned pale. Shouts of alarm and superstitious terror erupted. Ned raised his voice, carrying across the moat and to the walls. I am Eddard Stark, rightful lord of Winterfell. In the name of the old gods, I claim this castle and demand the Boltons surrender. Let those who wish to spare themselves the wrath of the North throw down their arms and open the gates. This is your one chance at mercy. For a moment, there was only stirring on the ramparts. Then a tall, thin figure in pale armor pushed forward. Jon recognized the silhouette from descriptions, Ramsay Bolton. A sly grin twisted the bastard's face, now legitimized by a father who might or might not still be alive. He called down, voice dripping scorn. Well, this is quite the spectacle. The dead Starks parade. Did someone sew the wolf's head back onto your shoulders, Robb? Or did you simply grow a new one? He laughed cruelly, though there was a ragged edge to it. Even Ramsay Bolton could not entirely hide his unease at the sight of so many living dead. Robb's lips curled, anger sparking in his eyes. You're the one who will lose his head, Bolton. Open the gates and surrender. We have no time to toy with you. Ramsay's grin turned savage. Come and take it then, he snapped. I have hostages, and I'm sure you wouldn't want them to come to harm. Jon's breath caught. Who? He shouted. Who do you hold? But Ramsay only laughed and withdrew from view, leaving the defenders to bar the gates. The threat of hostages was enough to force the Starks' hand. They could not simply storm the walls with no regard. The possibility that Sansa or Rickon's direwolf or some other unaccounted soul might be inside weighed heavily. But they did not see any sign of Sansa on the battlements. A siege began. Tents and pavilions stretched around Winterfell, cutting off supply lines. Days passed with no parley. Occasionally, Ramsay sent out small parties to probe the siege lines, but the loyal northern forces caught or killed them. The captives they took spoke of rumors that Roose Bolton was dead, murdered by his son. That the men inside grew restless, believing they were cursed. The presence of Ned Stark's ghostly face on the field shattered morale. Some men threatened desertion. Others drank themselves into a stupor. Ramsay answered with typical cruelty, flaying anyone he caught whispering about surrender. Finally, a bleak morning arrived when Ned decided they could wait no longer. Winter was not truly over, and the threat of the White Walkers demanded haste. They planned an assault using battering rams at the gates, scaling ladders, and any infiltration possible through the old tunnels that snaked beneath the walls. The night before the planned strike, they gathered around a central fire to finalize strategy. Catelyn walked among the men, offering quiet encouragement. Rickon sat, face pale. Robb paced. Jon and Ned discussed the infiltration team. Lyanna Stark listened, occasionally offering a short remark, her words revealing a cunning mind used to the old ways of the North. In the middle of their council, a cry rang out from a sentry at the perimeter. The Starks rushed to see. Through the gloom came two riders. One was Podrick Payne, looking exhausted. The other was a tall woman in armor, blonde hair. Shining faintly in the torchlight, Brienne of Tarth. Between them rode Sansa Stark, or at least the figure was cloaked and leaning heavily. Jon felt a surge of relief so profound that it nearly knocked him off his feet. He dashed forward as the riders dismounted. Sansa swayed, face drawn and weary, her hair hidden beneath the hood. He caught her in his arms. She blinked in surprise, recognized him, and tears ran down her cheeks. Jon, she whispered. He pressed his forehead to hers. Thank the gods you're safe. Then he drew back. But do you know who else is here? Before Sansa could speak, a collective hush spread through the camp as Ned Stark, Catelyn, and Robb stepped forward. Sansa looked from one face to the next, dazed as if she had to be dreaming. Then she stumbled backward, fear flickering. What is this? She breathed. Father? Mother? Robb? She turned on Jon, voice shaking. This isn't fair, Jon. Don't torment me with illusions. Ned spoke gently. It's no illusion, Sansa. We are truly here. The Lord of Light has sent us back. Sansa, reeling, dropped to her knees, trembling uncontrollably. Catelyn rushed to her daughter and embraced her, though Sansa stiffened at the dead woman's arms around her. Slowly, she realized the warmth and solidity. That it was real flesh. Sobs broke from her, and she clutched Catelyn, burying her face. Robb came to them, eyes shining with tears, kneeling in the snow. He put a hand on Sansa's back. Ned stood over them, sorrow and gratitude warring in his expression. Brienne of Tarth and Podrick Payne exchanged astonished looks, uncertain whether to kneel or run. Slowly, Sansa found enough composure to speak. I escaped Winterfell. Ramsay, Payne convulsed her face. He's monstrous. I feared for my life every moment I was there. He's done unspeakable things, Father. He tortured Theon, turned him into some broken thing called Reek. Her eyes flicked to Caitlin, to Ned, voice trembling with the horror of memory. We have to destroy him. We have to take Winterfell back. For Rickon, for Arya, for all of us. Ned held her trembling hands in his. We will, he promised. No daughter of House Stark shall be forced to endure such cruelty ever again. The time for justice is at hand. Come dawn, they put their plan in motion. Sansa was hustled to safety behind the lines while the rest of the host prepared for a final confrontation. Heavy rams crashed against Winterfell's gates as flights of arrows whistled from the ramparts. The defenders had turned desperate, but they were clearly short on numbers and hope. The clang of steel against steel rang out as ladders rose. Men scrambled onto the walls, scuffling with Bolton's soldiers. A swirl of chaos enveloped the fortress's outer defenses. In the midst of the fray, a hidden sally port opened. Ramsay, cunning as ever, led a band of savage followers around to strike at the attackers from behind. But Tormund Giantsbane and Davos had anticipated just such a maneuver. They and their men met Ramsay's ambush near the rear lines, swords and axes crashing. Ramsay fought with a madman's skill. His mouth twisted in a grin that seemed more snarl than smile. Tormund roared as their blades collided. For a moment, it looked as if Ramsay's ferocity would outmatch them. Then Ned Stark himself appeared, flanking the bastard of Bolton with a sword as calm and relentless as winter. Ramsay's grin faltered when he saw Ned's face, that legendary father of the North who had been beheaded. Alive, stepping toward him, Ramsay launched himself at Ned with a shriek, but Ned parried with deadly efficiency. He had taught many in Winterfell's yard the sword, after all, and though years had passed, muscle memory remained. In a flurry of steel, Ned disarmed Ramsay, sending the Bolton's sword spinning across the churned ground. Furious and foaming at the mouth, Ramsay tried to draw a knife, but Tormund seized him from behind. The scruffy wildling pinned Ramsay's arms, presenting him to Ned like a savage offering. Ned stared down at the bastard who had terrorized his children, defiled his home, and flayed countless innocents. The wave of hatred nearly overwhelmed him. He thought of Theon Greyjoy, once a ward of Winterfell, turned betrayer, then tortured to madness. He thought of Sansa in Ramsay's clutches. He remembered the flayed bodies that hung over the walls. A lethal resolve hardened Ned's features. You are no lord of Winterfell, he said quietly. You are a curse upon the North, and House Stark has returned. Ramsay tried to spit something vile, but his words became a shriek as Ned brought his sword down. The strike was swift, sure. The bastard of Bolton was left lifeless in the mud, blood staining the ground. Tormund let the body slump, panting. A roar of triumph went up from the loyal northern forces. The news spread fast through the besieged castle. A few pockets of Bolton loyalists fought on, but most either surrendered or fled. The gates were broken. The Stark banners advanced into the courtyard. In the confusion, men who had once doubted the stories of the Starks' resurrection saw Ned and Robb in the flesh, swords raised, leading the charge. Hope turned to fervor. The gates to the great keep were thrown open from inside. A wave of joyous weeping swept through the courtyard as the old defenders of Winterfell realized House Stark was truly home. When the last shouts of battle died, Ned and Robb walked up the steps of the great hall, breath heavy, footsteps echoing. Jon Snow followed. Caitlin and Rickon came behind, flanked by Lyanna Stark, who walked as if in a dream, absorbing the sight of the place she had left so many years ago, never to return until now. Fires had gutted some portions of the castle. Fresh repairs had been done, but the scars remained. Their hearts ached at the sight of the damage. And yet it was still Winterfell, a living, breathing place that recognized the return of its rightful lords. They passed under the stone arches, into the hall that once hosted so many feasts. The banners of the flayed man hung tattered, soon to be torn down. A hush settled as the Starks gathered at the dais. Outside, men chanted their names, a clamor of victory resounding. Sansa came forward, escorted by Brienne. She stared at the seat where Ned and Caitlin had once presided over meals and judgments. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she saw her mother and father climb to their old seats. Rickon, wide-eyed, clung to her side, taking in every detail as if uncertain it was real. Robb, that intangible mix of young king and older brother, stood near them, a hand on Sansa's shoulder. Ned Stark, solemn, gazed around at his family, alive again, battered by life and death. But here, Catelyn took his hand. He glanced at the throng of men and women who filed in behind them, tears streaming down their faces, some kneeling, others cheering. House Stark reigned once more in Winterfell, in a way that defied every law of gods and men. When Ned spoke, his voice carried the weight of all that had happened, and all that was yet to come. The Boltons are no more. Winterfell is ours, and we shall restore it, not for ourselves alone, but for every true Northman who has bled, who has lost loved ones, who has endured these dark years. But our struggle does not end here. A greater darkness gathers beyond the wall, an ancient enemy that will spare neither king nor commoner. We stand at the brink of the long night once more. I ask you all, stand with us. Let us gather every house that calls itself loyal to the North. Let us muster every spear, every shield, because the war for life itself is coming, and we must face it together. A rousing cheer rose, echoing off the stone walls. In that instant, it felt like the North's heart beat again, the spirit of House Stark burning bright as the torches in the hall. Sansa sobbed softly in relief, clutching her mother's hand. Rickon tugged on Ned's sleeve, a childish motion belying the horrors he had endured. Robb exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. Jon, standing near, felt tears in his own eyes. He thought of the White Walkers, the army of the dead, the threat that overshadowed them. But for a moment, victory and unity glowed within these old walls. House Stark stood strong, resurrected in more ways than one. That night, they lit great fires in the courtyard, warming the old stones. Servants scurried to prepare whatever feast they could muster from the supplies. The North's lords gathered to see with their own eyes that the rumors were true. Catelyn walked among them, distributing kind words and gracious smiles, though she still bore the ache of losing so many years. Lyanna Stark slipped out, wandering the corridors in silent wonder, remembering a childhood cut short by fate. Jon found her near the crypts, gazing at the old statues, including her own, half-worn by time. She glanced at him, 1,000 questions in her eyes. But none were asked. She only laid a hand on his cheek, her eyes sad and understanding. He sensed she knew the secret of his parentage, that perhaps all he had guessed might be confirmed. But still, she said nothing, and he did not press her. The night was about victory and reunion, not old revelations that could tear the family apart. When Ned and Catelyn finally had a private moment in the solar, they held each other as if afraid to part, voices murmuring comfort and sorrow for all that was lost. They remembered their children scattered across the realms and beyond, Arya, still missing, Bran, lost beyond the wall. But for the first time, there was hope. Ned, with a quiet intensity, said, "We will find them. All of them. We will make this family whole." Catelyn managed a smile, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "The gods have given us a miracle, a second chance. We must not squander it." Meanwhile, Robb roamed the battlements, reacquainting himself with the castle's defenses. He nodded in approval at each crenellation, each arrow slit. Ghost trotted along beside him, the direwolf's red eyes watchful. Jon found him near the gatehouse, staring out at the darkness beyond the flickering torches. Robb's voice was low. "I still remember the trident when Father left to become the hand of the king. I remember our vow to guard the North. We are the Watchers of the North now, in truth." He paused, glancing at Jon. "We need every ally we can muster to face what's coming. The Umbers, the Karstarks, the Manderleys, all must unite. And the Targaryen girl across the sea, Daenerys, they say. She has dragons?" Jon gave a grim nod. "So they say. Perhaps she can be an ally, or perhaps she threatens the realm. Too many questions remain, but we cannot fight the war on all fronts alone." Robb exhaled slowly, the weight of kingship pressing upon him again. "At least we have Father's counsel this time," he said quietly, a note of relief in his tone. "I lost so many good men because I was young and overconfident. Now perhaps we stand a chance." In the days that followed, the Starks consolidated control. Houses that had once been reluctant fell in line upon hearing of Ramsay's death and seeing the rightful lords restored. They dismantled the Bolton symbols, sending the flayed man banners to be burned. Grey Wind's remains were never found, but in the crypts, Robb carved a new statue to honor his direwolf's memory. Rickon walked often through the castle, searching for traces of Shaggy Dog or the siblings he hardly knew, his face set with a fierce determination to never be separated again. Sansa, regaining her composure, took on tasks of running the household. She possessed a quiet strength that she had learned through suffering, and she used it to reorganize the staff, ensure the men were provisioned, and see that the people of Winterfell were fed and cared for. In this, she found a sense of purpose. Ned, with Jon's help, began sending ravens to every corner of the north. Then, beyond the north, to the Riverlands, the Vale, even King's Landing if they could. The letter spoke of the threat from the White Walkers and the need for unity. The dead do not care about our titles or our feuds, one missive read. They only march to snuff out the living. We must stand together or perish. Whether these words would be heeded by the Lannisters or the Tyrells, no one knew, but they had to try. At night, the Starks took counsel together. They sat in the great hall, each warmed by the presence of the others. Catelyn pressed them to find Arya. She could scarcely rest, worrying about her youngest daughter. Ned and Robb listened gravely, promising they would dispatch search parties and envoys. Sansa recalled the last glimpses she had of Arya in King's Landing so many years ago, but she had no new leads. Lyanna Stark, still an outsider in some ways, offered to travel and seek out the truth, but Ned would not allow her to wander alone in a realm that had changed so drastically. The days stretched into weeks. Winterfell's walls bustled with repairs. The blackened keep was cleaned of its grime, new lumber brought in to shore up damaged towers. The Stark banners fluttered in the breeze. Over time, more lords arrived, kneeling to declare fealty. The Manderleys came, bringing wagons of supplies. The Umbers rode in, boisterous and relieved to be rid of the Boltons' overshadowing. The great hall was full of life again, though it was a life tinged with wariness. Everyone felt the chill in the wind, an intangible sense that the real battle lay beyond the horizon. And at the fringes of thought, each of the resurrected Starks grappled with the knowledge that they had crossed the boundary between life and death. They carried the weight of that mystery in their eyes. It made Ned's voice softer but more resolute. It made Catelyn's smiles rarer but more real. It made Robb more cautious, more contemplative. Rickon, forced to grow up through unimaginable horrors, now had the second chance of a childhood, though he bore a seriousness that seldom left him. Lyanna Stark walked the corridors like a ghost, half nostalgic, half tormented by the swirl of memories from her old life. Sometimes in the Godwood, she knelt by the heart tree, placing her forehead against the red bark, tears slipping down her cheeks. Jon saw her once, but he did not intrude. He simply bowed his head in respect, sensing she carried regrets that time had not forgiven. At last, the day came when Melisandre appeared again. She arrived not alone, but with a small group of wildlings who bore torches and haunted expressions. They crossed the fields to the gates of Winterfell, demanding audience. Jon, Ned, and Robb met them in the courtyard. Melisandre's face was drawn and pale, her red gown dusty from travel. She bowed slightly, eyes flicking to the Stark family. "It is done," she said, voice hoarse. "You have reclaimed your home, but the true enemy is upon us. The Night King prepares his forces." Jon stiffened. "How soon?" She closed her eyes. "Sooner than we wish. He has reanimated fallen whites from Hardhome to Eastwatch. His generals have awakened, forging new ranks from every battlefield in the north. He will come, perhaps not tomorrow, but in the near time. We must be ready." Ned nodded, jaw set. "The North shall meet him. We must gather at the wall or near it. My children's lives, the realm's lives, all depend on our unity." Melisandre inclined her head. "That is the truth I have seen in the flames. But also I have seen something else." She turned her eyes on Jon. "A secret, hidden in Winterfell's crypts. A secret of birthright. You must discover it soon, for it may change the alliances we form. The dragon and the wolf must unite, or the darkness will triumph." She said no more, turning to walk away, leaving the Starks to puzzle over her words. Ned and Lyanna exchanged a loaded glance. Jon sensed the tension, but still, no one spoke openly of it. The shadows were long in the courtyard, the fiery torches making strange shapes on the ancient walls. They all felt the press of time, the dread of a cosmic war that overshadowed politics or personal vendettas. In the weeks that followed, Winterfell became the assembly point for the largest northern army in a generation. Men and women from every corner arrived, forging new alliances or repairing old feuds under the watchful eyes of the resurrected Starks. The vow to fight together against the dead overshadowed lesser quarrels. The blacksmiths worked day and night forging arrowheads of dragonglass, newly acquired from caches discovered on Dragonstone's shores and shipped north by secret arrangements. Davos had a hand in that, ensuring that word of the impending war reached any that might help. Word also reached the Vale, where Peter Baelish lurked, though what moves he would make, no one could yet say. One chilly morning, Robb and Jon stood on the battlements again, looking north. Robb exhaled, the wind tousling his auburn hair. "No matter what comes," he said softly, "I'm grateful for this chance. To stand beside you, to stand with father, mother, and the rest. I never thought I'd see them again after the twins." Jon swallowed. "Nor I." He gazed over the mustering armies. "Do you think we stand a chance against the Night King?" Robb's lips pressed tight. "We have to," he said simply. "The living must not bow to the dead." He glanced sideways at Jon, a quirk of a grim smile forming. "Even if we ourselves have already cheated death." Jon let out a half-laugh, half-sigh. "Perhaps that's our edge. We know what lies beyond." Robb clasped his shoulder. They stood in silence, allowing the wind to whip around them. Below, the courtyard bustled with activity, soldiers training, wagons of supplies arriving, the clang of steel from the forges. In the Godwood, Ned Stark knelt by the heart tree with Catelyn, quietly seeking solace in the old ways. Not far from them, Lyanna Stark roamed, her thoughts locked away. Sansa oversaw the distribution of winter stores. Rickon, under the supervision of an old master-at-arms, practiced archery. Life burgeoned in Winterfell. A life that had been stolen from them once. Now it was reclaimed. They had come so far, defying the very stranger himself, bridging the gap between life and death. Yet the greatest test remained ahead. The White Walkers gathered in the far darkness, unstoppable except by the unity and resilience of the living. The newly risen Starks, bound tighter now than ever by shared tragedy and second chances, would face the oncoming storm. Would the Lord of Light bless them once more? Would the old gods watch over them? None could say for certain. But as the snow drifted gently over the ancient walls, a sense of destiny settled upon Winterfell. Though they had been parted by death, House Stark was together again, stronger in spirit and more determined. And as the North rallied, as the ravens flew out in all directions bearing warnings and pleas for aid, a quiet certainty formed in the hearts of those who looked upon Eddard Stark's face and saw the unyielding promise there. They would stand against the long night, father and mother and children alive again in the place that had defined them. And in that unity, that fierce will to protect the realm, they found their courage, prepared to meet the dawn or the darkness that would decide the fate of Westeros forever. In the weeks that followed the taking of Winterfell, winter winds battered the newly raised walls and repairs, yet a sense of hope and purpose drove every effort. At times, drifting snow piled against the old stone ramparts, swirling into high banks that partially concealed the black scorch marks from the Boltons' occupation. But each passing day saw progress. Masons replaced shattered stones, carpenters restored destroyed beams, a flurry of laborers in thick cloaks dug new drainage channels and cleared rubble from the corners of the courtyard. Through it all, a cacophony of hammer blows echoed from dawn to dusk, undercut by the constant ring of steel as soldiers trained in the yard. The newly formed host of the North, an amalgam of loyal bannermen, surviving remnants of houses that had once supported the young wolf, wildlings pledged to Jon Snow, and a handful of knights who had seen too much southern treachery and set their hearts on the cold. Honorable domain milled about the grounds. Men in patched cloaks and improvised armor took instruction from former lords and knights who had barely escaped the cruelties of the South. Glover men sparred with Mormonts, while a few Umbers barked advice from the sidelines. Sometimes the clang of practice swords was overlaid with shouts from new recruits awkwardly grappling with spear hafts and shield straps. But no matter how untrained or under-equipped some might be, they shared a united resolve. Eddard Stark, daily wearing a thick wool surcoat adorned with the Stark direwolf, walked among them, patient but firm. Some of his men would pause in whatever they were doing and stare at him in silent reverence. Even after weeks, many could not help a chill across their spine to see Ned Stark alive. But in his solemn gazes and carefully measured words, they recognized the same fatherly, steady presence that had guided the North for so many years. And so men spoke quietly of a new age. If the North's beloved father could return from death, perhaps the North itself could rise from the ashes of blood and betrayal. Catelyn Stark also walked the courtyard, though she did not linger among the soldiers the way Ned did. She focused on the matters of household and governance, speaking softly to the old stewards who had survived. In storerooms and cellars, she tallied supplies. Drawing from experience as Lady of Winterfell, she organized distribution of rations and winter clothing. Sometimes her hand trembled at the sight of a half-burned tapestry or a familiar hallway that had been splashed with Bolton cruelty. At night, she would stare at the great hall's high rafters, remembering family feasts from a lifetime ago. But she stayed busy, the swirl of tasks leaving little time to dwell on the unnatural reality of her own returned life. Sansa embraced duties as well, though her hands trembled often with a leftover fear that would not quite fade. The memories of Ramsay's atrocities lingered like the echo of a terrible dream she could not quite banish. Yet she discovered a fierce resilience in herself. In those quiet moments with her mother, she said more than once, "I have survived King's Landing, Joffrey, Cersei, and Ramsay. Whatever else is coming, I will face it." And Catelyn would hold her, tears in her own eyes, wishing she could erase those wounds. But if anything, Sansa's experiences had honed her into a precise blade of determination. She kept a watchful eye on the comings and goings of the lords. She recognized subtle alliances or resentments. She advised Ned, explaining the cunning of men like Peter Baelish or the Freys, reminding him that the old codes of honor could be twisted by those who wore false smiles. Robb, restless by nature, took charge of training the troops alongside the remaining loyal captains who had once marched with him. He was changed, more sober than the young man who had first raised his banner. He seemed older in spirit, the boyish glint in his eyes tempered by betrayal and death. Still, there was a quiet hope inside him, a flicker that grew each day as he watched more of the North rally to them. Sometimes, when he set aside duty for a moment, a grin reminiscent of the old Robb would appear, usually at the sight of Rickon mocking the older recruits or chasing ghosts through the yard. But then the grin would fade, replaced by a measuring look at the horizon. He knew war loomed. Even if their immediate enemies had been driven out, the real threat was the long, silent march of the undead in the far north. Rickon had changed, too, though in some ways he was still that small boy who liked to hide under tables. He wandered the halls of Winterfell, remembering snatches of the childhood that had been ripped away. At times he seemed older than his years, eyes shadowed by everything he had lost. He spoke often about Shaggy Dog or about Osha, the wildling woman who had tried to protect him. Some nights, Sansa or Catelyn found him in the old bedchambers with tears on his cheeks. He never had the chance to truly grieve for all those stolen from him. Yet with each passing day, he found small joys, such as sparring with a wooden sword in the yard or exploring half-ruined towers where pigeons cooed in the rafters. He clung to the presence of his family as though any moment might snatch them away again. Lyanna Stark's presence remained a mystery to many. She was rarely recognized by men beyond the immediate circle, for her name was a legend from a previous generation. Still, some saw in her features the echo of Arya's face or the stubborn set of Sansa's jaw. She was slim, striking, her dark hair unbound most days, drifting around her shoulders. She spent hours in the Godswood as if trying to reacquaint herself with the old gods she had once prayed to in these same groves before war and tragedy. At other times, she'd walk the ramparts, gazing across the snows, her eyes distant as if her thoughts lay in a past that no one else could truly touch. Now and then someone would call her "my lady," only to see her start as though the words did not belong to her. More than once, Ned quietly joined her, fatherly concern etched on his face. But old sorrows and unspoken secrets loomed between them. She would press a hand to his, or say something soft that Jon could not overhear, then drift away again like a shadow. Jon Snow recognized that a secret coiled between Ned and Lyanna, one that the Red Woman had ominously hinted might be found in Winterfell's crypts. But so far, no one had laid it bare. Jon was not sure he wanted to know. If the truth of his birth had been withheld for so many years, perhaps it was better kept hidden. He found comfort instead in action. Forging alliances, training men, seeing to the defense of his family's ancestral seat. He wore black still, partly out of habit, partly out of the fact that he had died in service to the Night's Watch, an act some said freed him of his vows. His role now blended duty to the Watch's cause against the White Walkers with loyalty to the house he had always longed to truly call home. And if men stared at him in awe or whispered about him returning from death, he tried to ignore it. Tormund Giantsbane, The broad-shouldered wildling who still walked around with an irreverent grin, had grown fond of pacing the new training fields. Whenever a soldier complained of the cold, Tormund would smack him on the shoulder and laugh. "This is nothing," he'd say. "I've slept naked in a blizzard with only my beard for warmth." He would spend hours recounting outlandish adventures, claiming to have bedded a she-bear or wrestled a giant's wife, though most suspected half of it was nonsense. Still, Tormund's fearless approach to the cold had earned him respect among the Northerners. He trained them to fight with a ferocity that might match the undead. Ser Davos Seaworth, quiet and grim as always, served as the voice of reason. He walked the repaired ramparts, speaking softly with the watchmen, ensuring discipline was maintained. At times, he would join Ned Stark in long discussions about ravens, supply lines, and the alliances needed beyond the north. Davos had no illusions about how difficult it would be to persuade Southern lords or the Iron Throne to care about the White Walkers. But he offered counsel from hard-earned experience. When pressed, he admitted that before Stannis Baratheon's downfall, he had glimpsed the brutality of the war for the Iron Throne, and how petty it all looked, stacked against an existential threat from beyond the wall. Melisandre had taken up a small set of rooms near the top of the Great Keep. She rarely emerged in daylight. Sometimes, at dusk, men glimpsed her on a balcony, her red cloak fluttering, eyes on the distant north. It was rumored that in her chambers, braziers burned day and night while she stared into the flames, searching for visions. Few dared approach her. The watchers among the recruits had witnessed the Starks themselves step from death, an act that unnerved many. But Jon, who had once been resentful of her power, found himself strangely grateful, if uneasy. She had bestowed a miracle upon them, but her presence felt like a reminder of how precarious life and death could be. Often he wondered if the Red God demanded some darker price for these gifts. At last, a council was called in the Great Hall. Lords from throughout the north arrived, many trudging through slush and cold rains that battered the roads. Lord Glover, Lord Manderley, Lady Lyanna Mormont, a handful of Karstark representatives, the Umbers, and other lesser bannermen. They filled the hall with their retinues, their breath steaming in the chill. Though the fires roared along the walls, the old hall still held a draft that whistled under the doors. At the dais sat Eddard Stark, his face calm yet bearing the weight of what must be done. Catelyn Stark stood behind him, silent, while Robb and Sansa flanked him. On Ned's other side stood Jon Snow, wearing his black cloak over plain boiled leather. Lyanna Stark lingered behind them all, arms folded, eyes scanning the crowd. Rickon was present too, dwarfed by the tall lords but determined to witness the decisions that would shape the North's future. When the murmuring died, Ned rose. In the hush, every eye fixed on him, half in awe that this man was alive and breathing, half in anticipation of his words. Ned bowed his head briefly, looking at the gatherers with a gentleness that belied the warlike circumstances. Then he spoke. "My lords, ladies, and good folk of the North, I thank you for heeding our call and braving these difficult roads to come here. Once I was your lord, and it humbles me that you welcome me again. We all know the tragedy that befell our land, the betrayal of the Boltons, the horrors of the Red Wedding, the scattering of House Stark. Many good men died. And yet here we stand by the grace of the gods or a power beyond our full comprehension. The Starks have returned along with the loyal houses who never forgot the old ways." He paused, letting his gaze rest upon the Mormont banner, then the Glover men, then each house in turn. "I wish I could promise you peace and plenty, but the truth is far darker. The long night we have feared for generations creeps closer. The White Walkers stir beyond the wall. My son Jon Snow, who served in the Night's Watch, can speak to this threat better than I." Ned stepped back, gesturing for Jon to come forward. Nervous tension rippled through Jon's veins as he faced the lords. He recalled standing in front of them once before, a bastard overshadowed by Robb, by true-born heirs. Now everything had changed, yet the eyes that watched him were no less intimidating. He cleared his throat and forced his voice to carry. "My lords, I have fought the White Walkers. I have seen the dead rise in Harhome. Thousands of whites, unstoppable unless you have dragonglass or Valyrian steel. I have killed one of the others, and it's no small feat. If we stand divided, they will destroy us. If we unite, we have a chance at. But only if we gather our full strength and prepare. The wall may hold them for a time, but not forever. And the men of the Night's Watch are too few to oppose an army of the dead." Low muttering rose in pockets of the hall. Some had heard rumors, but the notion of an undead legion was terrifying. Some felt a prickle of doubt. Others recalled old tales from grandmothers. Lady Lyanna Mormont spoke, her young voice cutting through the murmurs. House Mormont knows the threat is real. We will stand with House Stark and Jon Snow until the end. She cast a fierce gaze around, daring anyone to contradict her. Lord Glover, a square-jawed man with streaks of gray in his hair, took a breath. We have pledged swords to House Stark because we believe you. The question is, how do we fight such creatures? We have steel, and that alone won't suffice. Robb stepped forward now, looking from face to face. We have assembled what dragoglass we could find, but we need far more. We've heard that Dragonstone, far to the south, sits on a great reserve of that substance. If we can form alliances with those who hold it, perhaps we can mine it and bring it north. It's a risk, but one we must take. Lord Manderley, voluminous in girth and wearing a thick green surcoat, cleared his throat. Dragonstone is under the Targaryen banner now, as rumor says. Daenerys Targaryen has landed in Westeros, though where exactly we do not know. She has dragons. Perhaps this young queen might be persuaded to lend them to the fight against these White Walkers. A stir went through the hall. Whispers of dragons had circulated for years, but few had believed them. Now, apparently, the Dragon Queen was real and she was rumored to have a claim on the Iron Throne. Some faces looked uneasy at the idea of courting Targaryen power. Ned's own expression tightened, a flicker of old memories in his eyes, but he nodded. If Daenerys Targaryen truly has dragons, we may need them. We must also consider forging alliances with any southern lords who will join us. The White Walkers threaten all men, not just the north. Another outburst of chatter erupted until Ned raised a hand to quiet them. He continued more softly, we will gather an army here at Winterfell. When the time is right, we will march north to face the threat on our own terms. If the wall is breached, we must be ready to meet them near the gift, or even further. We cannot let them pour into our heartland unopposed. For now, I will send envoys to Dragonstone and beyond to see if any can bring us the dragoglass and support we need. Every house must do its part to prepare. Train your men. Forge new weapons. Spread word among the small folk that if they can't fight, they must take shelter in fortresses or flee south. We cannot face this threat in the usual ways of lords and knights, for it is older and colder than any mortal war. Lord Serwyn and others signaled agreement. The lords rose, each making solemn vows, some in the name of the old gods, some in the seven. By the day's end, they had hammered out the basics of a plan: strengthen Winterfell, gather provisions, send out ravens to the White Harbor docks for ships that might sail south or carry dragoglass north. They recognized it might not be enough, but at least it was a start. When the lords dispersed, chatter echoed in the hallways, talk of the Targaryen queen, the White Walkers, the improbable resurrection of the Starks. Servants hurried to prepare meals for the departing bannermen. Outside, the wind rattled the gates, swirling snow in little eddies across the courtyard. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge. War was coming, but the forging of swords never ended. In the aftermath of the council, Ned retreated to his old solar. He stood at the window, remembering how he used to watch the courtyard below, waiting for his children to come running from lessons. Catelyn found him there, stepping in quietly, shutting the door behind her. A hush lay between them as she moved to his side and gently placed a hand on his arm. "How fare you?" she asked. "You look troubled." He exhaled, pressing a palm against the cold stone windowsill. "I think often of what was stolen from us. You, Robb, our children. I never imagined the gods would allow a second chance. And yet I fear the cost. The war to come, it might claim us all again, or even worse, leave us in some cursed half-life. But we have no choice but to stand." Catelyn's face softened with sympathy. She touched his cheek. "We stand together this time. That is a gift, Ned. Whatever madness brought us back, I believe we were meant to protect our children. Arya is still missing, but we'll find her. We'll find Bran too. And when the walkers come, we'll face them side by side." He folded her into an embrace, feeling the warmth of her. It was still astonishing that they could hold each other after death. But the moment passed swiftly, for duty called. Reports came in of wildling scouts spotting whites beyond Eastwatch. The next day, a raven arrived from Castle Black, bearing frantic words from the current Lord Commander who had taken the role after Jon's departure. The gist was that more rangers had vanished north of the wall. The White Walkers, it seemed, were stirring faster than anticipated. Jon read the raven's letter at the same table as Ned, Robb, and Sansa. He set it down with a frown. "They keep losing patrols." The others seemed to be testing the Watch's defenses. "If they decide to push in force, the Watch is too thin to hold." Robb's hand curled into a fist. "We need to move quickly or the wall may fall before we're ready." Sansa, anxiety etched on her features, said, "We have so little time to gather allies in the south. Even if we send ravens, how soon can they respond? Ned gave a firm nod. We do what we must. Jon, you and Davos will sail from White Harbor to Dragonstone. If Daenerys Targaryen is there, speak with her. Show her the truth if you can. Bring back the dragonglass. Seek her help. I recall Robert's hatred of the Targaryens, but Robert is dead and that enmity cannot matter if the entire realm is at stake. A tense silence followed. Robb clenched his jaw. I go with you, Jon, but father needs me here to lead the men if the White Walkers advance sooner. You'll take Tormund, a few reliable men, perhaps. If the negotiations fail, at least you won't be alone. He glanced at Sansa. We'll hold Winterfell until you return. Jon swallowed the sudden tension in his chest. Negotiating with a Targaryen queen was not a task he felt prepared for. But Ned's eyes were kind, resolute. I have faith in you, he said. We all do. That very day, Jon began preparations. A swift messenger rode to White Harbor to secure a ship. Davos was enthusiastic about the plan, having once served Stannis aboard a vessel. He organized supplies, rummaging for anything that might help them plead their case. Tormund said he wasn't fond of floating boxes, but admitted he'd go wherever Jon went. The wildling's loyalty had become unshakable. A gray morning dawned as Jon prepared to depart. He dressed in furs, a strong leather jerkin, Longclaw at his hip. In the courtyard, Ned, Robb, Catelyn, Sansa, Rickon, and Lyanna Stark came to see him off. The men who would accompany him stood behind him, horses snorting in the crisp air. Davos was there, leaning on the pommel of his saddle, trying to ignore the disquiet of traveling on what might be a perilous journey. Tormund had a broad grin plastered on, though behind it flickered concern for the unknown southern world. Jon turned to Ned, uncertain if he should kneel or bow or simply embrace him. In the end, Ned pulled him close, pressing a hand behind his head as he might have done when Jon was a boy. The gods watch over you, son, Ned said. Be safe. And remember, honor and honesty will serve you better than any cunning in this matter. Catelyn stepped forward, though the old tension in her eyes remained. She had never loved that Jon was her husband's bastard, but things had changed. She touched his shoulder, her tone gentle. I pray for your success, Jon. We all depend on it. Return to us soon. Sansa hugged him, whispering her gratitude for all he was doing. Rickon looked up at Jon, pleading, Come back. You have to be here when we fight them, Jon. And Jon ruffled his hair, promising he would. Lyanna Stark, Jon's aunt, though that truth was not yet spoken aloud, hovered at the edges, dark eyes lingering on him as if wanting to say something. At last, she came forward, a slight tremble in her posture. I have a feeling you'll fare well, she said, voice subdued. The Targaryens. They've always had a connection to the north, whether they realized it or not. She paused, opening her mouth to say more, then only gave a slight smile and backed away. Jon felt the weight of unspoken knowledge. Part of him wanted to demand answers. Another part wanted to run from the possibility. But there was no time. He mounted his horse, giving Winterfell one last glance, as if memorizing the shape of the battlements against the bleak sky. Then he led the small party out the gates, heading for White Harbor, hearts heavy with the knowledge that every passing day could be precious. The ride across the north was swift but wearying. Mists clung to low-lying fields, and the roads remained rutted from the winter thaw. Villagers they passed whispered that House Stark had truly returned, that Lord Eddard had been seen in Winterfell's halls, faces lit with hope or confusion. Jon didn't linger to confirm or deny. His small group pressed on, pausing only at inns or holdfasts to rest the horses. Tormund scoffed at every southern contraption he saw, from windmills to stone fences, but Davos patiently explained details when asked. A certain camaraderie blossomed among the traveling party, bonded by the shared mission and the sense that the entire realm's fate might rest on what transpired in Dragonstone. At last, White Harbor rose before them, its harbor waters dark and choppy under iron-gray skies. The Manderleys had done their best to patch up the city after years of war and occupation. Fishmongers called from the docks, the smell of brine and gutted catch saturating the air. Sailors trundled crates. Guards in the Merman sigil patrolled the gates. Lord Wyman Manderley himself greeted Jon and Davos in the courtyard of the new castle, offering them a feast of bread and salt and fish stew. Manderley's girth was formidable, but his eyes were sharp. He listened intently to Jon's plan, nodding vigorously. "You'll have your ship," Manderley declared, smacking a meaty hand on the table and making the plates jump. "One of my fastest. We'll stock it with provisions enough to get you to Dragonstone and back. God's willing, you'll return with enough dragonglass to line all our battlements." Davos gave a humble bow, grateful for Manderley's generosity. But the older lord only waved a hand, saying, "We owe House Stark more than we can ever repay. If I can do one thing to help save the North, indeed the whole realm, I'll do it." Then he lowered his voice. "I hope the Dragon Queen is more merciful than some Targaryens of old. The Mad King was no friend to your father, if you recall." He gave Jon a pointed look. Jon couldn't keep a flicker of worry from his face. "That's what we hope to discover," he said softly. "Whether Daenerys Targaryen wants to help save the realm or only claim the Iron Throne for herself." Within 2 days, they boarded the Swift Narwhal, an odd name for a modest but agile merchantman from Manderley's fleet. Tormund grumbled about stepping onto a floating coffin, but the morning tide favored them. Sails snapped in a biting wind, and soon White Harbor dwindled behind them. The sea stretched vast and cold. Davos moved comfortably about the deck, sometimes helping the sailors. Jon tried to keep from retching during the first day of rough water, thinking wryly that he'd faced undead abominations but not the rolling of a ship. Tormund turned green as well, cursing under his breath about the bloody waves. They made steady progress south. The waves kept up a constant rocking, but eventually Jon found his sea legs. Days blurred together in a steady routine. Scanning the horizon, checking the sails, enduring the unending tang of salt, the cry of gulls, the whistle of the wind. Davos taught Tormund some knots, which the wildling claimed he would use to tie up the biggest bear for my next bed. Laughter broke the tension now and again, but underneath the levity, the men knew their mission's importance. They docked briefly at Gulltown in the Vale to resupply. Word in the local taverns was that Queen Daenerys Targaryen had taken Dragonstone indeed, but also that she had set sail for King's Landing. Rumors conflicted. Some claimed she had burned a Lannister army on the Rose Road, others that she had formed an alliance with House Tyrell. All was uncertain. Jon and Davos decided to sail on to Dragonstone to see if the Queen still held it as a base or if she had left a garrison behind. If Daenerys was not there, perhaps they could find at least a portion of the dragonglass. With a few final barrels of fresh water, the Swift Narwhal set out again, the gulls shrieking overhead. On a windy afternoon, they spotted the dark silhouette of Dragonstone's volcanic mountains rising from the sea. Clouds clung to the peaks, and the fortress itself perched forbiddingly on the highest ridge, spires shaped like massive dragon talons. Smoke curled from a few vents in the stony cliffs, giving the island an ominous air. As they drew closer, Jon's heart drummed a steady beat of apprehension. This place had once been the seat of Stannis Baratheon, the staging ground for Melisandre's fervor. Now it was rumored to be the Targaryen queen's stronghold once more. The Swift Narwhal approached the harbor, brandishing a white flag of truce. Soldiers in Targaryen livery, black and red, stood on the quays, crossbows at the ready. Davos signaled that they came in peace. Tormund grumbled at the sight of so many armed men, but kept his sword sheathed. At last, they were allowed to disembark under scrutiny from about 24 guards. A knight stepped forward, demanding to know their purpose. Jon noted the three-headed dragon on the knight's surcoat, marking him as loyal to House Targaryen. Davos introduced them. Ser Davos Seaworth, advisor to Lord Eddard Stark and his son Jon Snow, who was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. "We come seeking audience with Queen Daenerys." But the knight shook his head. "Her Grace is not present at Dragonstone. She has joined her armies near King's Landing. We hold this island in her name." He eyed the newcomers suspiciously. "State your business here plainly, or you'll find yourselves on the next ship back north, if you aren't put in chains." Jon stepped up, ignoring the flash of crossbows. "We're here because of the threat of the White Walkers. We need dragonglass. The island is said to be rich with it. We don't come to make war. We come to request a resource that may save the entire realm." He held the knight's gaze steadily, letting the sincerity of his voice carry. Several of the Targaryen soldiers exchanged glances, uncertain if they should laugh or take him at his word. The knight seemed uncertain as well. At last he cleared his throat. "We have orders to maintain the island, but not to enter any new treaties. If her grace has not sanctioned it, we cannot simply allow foreigners to mine our shores." Davos appealed, voice calm. "Sire, if the queen has gone to war, wouldn't she want allies in the north? The Boltons are defeated. House Stark is reestablished. If the queen hopes to sit the Iron Throne, she'll need the North's loyalty. This dragonglass is worthless to most, but invaluable to us in the fight against the dead. I believe the queen would prefer we help each other." The knight wavered. "I must consult my superior." He gestured for them to remain on the docks. Guards ringed around, ensuring they couldn't wander off. Tormund sighed, folding his arms. Jon glanced back at the swift narwhal, anchored nearby, uncertain if they'd be forced to sail away empty-handed. An hour passed, then two. Finally, a swirl of black and red cloaks approached, led by a tall woman with silver hair pulled into braids. But it was not the queen. Rather, she introduced herself as Melisandre of Noth, advisor to Daenerys Targaryen. Her face held a poised courtesy. She greeted them, repeating that the queen was absent, but inquired politely about their request. Jon and Davos recounted the rising threat beyond the wall, the dire need for dragonglass, the necessity of forging alliances. Melisandre listened intently, occasionally glancing to the silent Tormund. When they finished, Melisandre said, "Her Grace has indeed expressed interest in forging alliances with the North to defeat the White Walkers, though her primary focus was on removing the Lannisters from power. If you wish to mine the dragonglass, we must confirm that you will not use these resources against her. Do you come to swear fealty?" Jon's heart pounded. He'd not expected an immediate demand of fealty. Yet he thought of Ned, of the entire realm's need. He said carefully, "We come to treat as allies against the dead. The question of fealty can be discussed if the queen meets with us. I don't presume to speak for all the North, only that we share a common enemy that transcends any single crown. If the queen truly wants peace when her war is done, or if she wants the realm intact, then the White Walkers must be stopped." Melisandre's brown eyes flickered with thought. "You speak boldly, but her grace is not here to judge the sincerity of your words. However, in her absence, she did leave instructions that we be open to such requests. The dragonglass is plentiful in the island's caves. I can grant you limited permission to begin harvesting it under supervision so long as you vow you will not remove any other resources and that you do no harm to Dragonstone or its people." Davos let out a breath of relief. Jon inclined his head. "That is all we ask." Tormund grunted something about rocks that kill snow demons, but Melisandre appeared not to catch the exact wording. That night, Jon's party was granted lodging in the old castle's outbuildings, once used by Stannis's men. The fortress interior, shaped like dragons and ridged with basalt, loomed overhead. Fires crackled in the braziers of the courtyard, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Davos marveled at being back on Dragonstone without Stannis. Tormund gazed around, unimpressed by the architecture, muttering that the place smelled of ash and gloom. Jon, however, wandered the corridors after the guards allowed him a brief look. He paused by a carved panel that depicted dragons in flight, locked in ancient battle. The Targaryens had always been tied to magic. He wondered if, ironically, their legacy might be the key to saving Westeros from an even older magic of the White Walkers. The following morning, Melisandre led them into the winding caves that snaked beneath the fortress. Torches cast flickering light on walls of obsidian. Sparks of reflected fire revealed veins of black glass, jagged and glossy. Jon reached out a tentative hand and felt the cold, slick surface. This was the raw material that could tip the balance in the war up north. They had only to mine it. Already, Melisandre had arranged for picks and laborers, and Davos had recruited a few volunteers from the swift narwhal. Tormund took one swing with a pick, sending shards of obsidian clattering onto the cave floor, then gave a bark of laughter as if nothing pleased him more than smashing rock. Jon let out a slow breath, feeling hope for the first time in weeks. This place had enough dragonglass to arm every soldier in the north. They threw themselves into the work. Day after day, they chipped away at the walls. The laborers wore cloths across their mouths to keep from inhaling too much dust. Ships from White Harbor would need to arrive soon to transport large quantities north. For now, they collected what they could in crates. It was slow going, but each crate of obsidian felt like a piece of the realm's salvation. Outside, storms occasionally lashed the castle. When the sea churned too violently, the men rested from the mining. But when the weather was fair, they toiled until their muscles ached. During quiet evenings, Melisandre spoke with Jon and Davos about Daenerys's cause, how she hoped to break the wheel of tyranny, free slaves, and unite the realm under a just ruler. Davos listened politely, occasionally exchanging glances with Jon. They did not promise anything beyond an alliance against the dead. Still, Jon found himself respecting the Targaryen queen from afar. He thought, if she truly is as righteous as her advisor says, then perhaps father was right, these old grudges must be set aside for the greater good. After nearly 2 weeks, they had enough obsidian to fill several large crates, though more remained. A fresh ship from White Harbor was due soon, bearing more men to help. In the meantime, Jon considered traveling to King's Landing to speak directly with Daenerys. But Davos cautioned that going into the Lion's Den, literally Lannister territory, might be too dangerous if they had no certain means of communication. Word came that Daenerys and her dragons had struck a blow against the Lannister forces near Highgarden, but the details were murky. The realm was in chaos. In the end, Jon decided to wait at Dragonstone for a short while longer, hopeful that Daenerys might return. If she did, he would negotiate face to face. If not, they would load as much dragonglass as possible onto the next ships and return north. Tormund grumbled about missing the fighting that might already be happening up in the north, but Jon reminded him, we need this glass to stand any chance. Better to do this properly than rush back with only a handful of arrowheads. They continued their mining efforts in the caves day by day. Late one afternoon, as they emerged into the castle courtyard, exhausted and covered in obsidian dust, a horn sounded from the battlements. Jon's head snapped up. He spotted a cluster of soldiers on the wall, pointing out to sea. A black and red banner whipped in a gathering wind. Then, across the waves, Jon heard a distant roar. He froze, heart pounding. A moment later, a dark shape appeared in the cloudy sky, enormous wings beating above the water. Then 2 more. Dragons! Tormund let out a startled curse, shading his eyes. The dragons descended in a swirl of wind and spitting flame, stirring up sand on the beach. Atop the largest, black scales, red wing membranes rode a figure in a dark traveling cloak. Behind her soared smaller dragons, though they were massive by any mortal standard. Men scattered in fear or awe, scuttling to make room. Davos exhaled. So the rumors were true. She has 3. A hush fell over the courtyard as the dragons alighted on the rocky outcroppings near the main gate. The largest roared, making men clutch their ears. Soldiers in Targaryen livery rushed forward, calling greetings, their own expressions wrapped with something akin to worship. Then the woman dismounted. Pale hair glinted in the dim sunlight. Even from a distance, Jon felt an aura of command radiating from her. This, he realized, must be Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons. Jon straightened, squaring his shoulders, forcing himself to remain steady. He had faced White Walkers in their eerie silence, but never had he seen living, breathing dragons. They were both majestic and terrifying. Steam rose from their nostrils, eyes glinted gold. When Daenerys strode into the courtyard, her retinue, Grey Worm and other unsullied, a few Dothraki blood riders, fell into step behind her, carrying the spoils of some recent campaign. She paused when she saw Jon and Davos in their dusty clothes, Tormund scowling at her side. Melisandre quickly stepped forward, bowing. Your Grace, these are the emissaries from the north I wrote to you about. They have been mining the obsidian with our permission. Daenerys turned her gaze upon Jon, measuring him. She was beautiful in a fierce, regal way, eyes the pale purple of old Targaryen lines. Her voice was calm but carried a note of power. I heard of your arrival, though not in detail. You are Jon Snow, once Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, now allied with House Stark. Jon inclined his head. I am, your Grace. My father, the man I've always called Father, Eddard Stark, retook Winterfell from the Boltons. We face a threat greater than any southern war, the White Walkers. I've come to gather dragonglass in hopes of forging weapons that can kill them. It's our only chance to protect the realm, including your future subjects, from annihilation. Daenerys listened, her expression unreadable. So I've heard. My hand, Tyrion Lannister, told me some men in the north believe in this threat. Yet it's difficult for many to accept. especially when the Lannisters themselves remain a dire threat to my campaign. Cersei Lannister sits the Iron Throne under false pretenses. My forces and I have just returned from a victory, but the war is far from over. Why should I redirect my efforts to a threat that many say is a myth? Jon met her gaze, refusing to flinch. Because I've seen the walkers with my own eyes. They are not a myth. The dead are marching. They will not stop with the North. If we fall, they will come for the whole realm, including King's Landing. Even your dragons might not be enough, for they are numerous, relentless. I'm not here to demand anything. I only ask for the chance to equip my people with the means to fight back. If you truly wish to be queen of these lands, you'll want subjects who are alive, not wights in an undead army. She studied him in silence. Then her gaze drifted to Tormund, who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else, and to Davos, who stepped forward, clearing his throat. Your Grace, I'm Ser Davos Seaworth, once in the service of Stannis Baratheon. He tried to claim the Iron Throne from this very island, but circumstances, Davos grimaced. He faced tragedy. Now, I serve the Starks. I've traveled north of the Wall myself. I've seen things no man should see. These White Walkers are real. Daenerys gave a small nod. She glanced to Grey Worm, who stood at her flank, stony-faced but clearly unimpressed with the talk of undead. Then she looked back at Jon. I am Daenerys Storeborn of House Targaryen, mother of dragons, breaker of chains, rightful queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Yet you do not bend the knee, Jon Snow. I see no sign you intend to. Jon tensed, choosing his words carefully. I've come seeking an alliance, not to become your enemy. My father, Eddard Stark, once fought your father's armies in Robert's Rebellion. The realm has changed. I was never raised to rule or to bend men's hearts. But I know what's coming beyond that wall. We need your help, or at least your neutrality. If we survive the Night King, the North can decide afterwards whether to swear fealty to you or not. But first, we all must live. A flicker of something, amusement, curiosity, crossed Daenerys' face. I see. And if I refuse? If I decide that Dragonstone's riches belong to me alone and that I will not share them without the North's immediate pledge. Jon's chest tightened. He forced himself not to glance at the dragons perched ominously, their tails curling. Tormund might have reached for his axe if Davos hadn't placed a calming hand on him. But as the moment stretched, Daenerys suddenly let out a quiet sigh as though wearied by all the demands placed upon her. You may keep mining the dragonglass, she said. I've lost too many allies and ships in the south to risk alienating the North over a resource I personally have no immediate use for. Let it never be said Daenerys Targaryen was unwilling to help the realm. But know this, when the walkers come, if they are as real as you say, I will expect the North to stand with me when the time comes for unity against any other threats as well. If I succeed in claiming the throne, I will remember who extended a hand in need and who did not. Jon almost smiled in relief. We will remember, he said solemnly. Over the next few days, Daenerys and Jon spoke more, albeit in cautious conversation. She was curious about House Stark's resurrection. The rumors had reached her ears, though they sounded too fantastical even for a queen who had walked through fire. Jon confirmed that Ned Stark lived again, as did Robb and Catelyn. Her amazement was tempered by wariness. Resurrection always carried connotations of dark magic in many cultures. But she admitted that with dragons at her side, she could hardly doubt the existence of other supernatural forces. In return, Jon asked her about her plan to break the Lannisters' power. She explained how she had alliances with the Dornish and with some of the Reach Lords, though Highgarden had recently fallen. The lines of conflict were fluid. She had expected an easy victory, but the Lannisters had outmaneuvered her in certain battles. The war was far from decided. She also showed him her dragons. A short flight near the cliffs let Jon witness the monstrous wing beats up close. The largest dragon, Drogon, soared with a savage grace that made the entire island tremble when he landed. Jon felt both awe and dread as he stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from the beast's scaled hide. Daenerys watched him carefully as though measuring how he reacted. He forced himself to remain steady, though his heart hammered. The memory of whites and White Walkers paled beside this primal power. When Daenerys saw he did not cower or shrink away, she allowed herself a half-smile. Most men tremble or faint, she said. You hold your ground well, Jon Snow. He cleared his throat. I've seen the dead walk. A dragon is impressive, but at least it is alive and loyal to you. We'll need all the living we can get. Meanwhile, the mining operations expanded under Targaryen supervision, loading crates onto ships for the North. Daenerys gave no sign of reneging on her promise, though she occasionally prodded Jon for more details of the White Walkers and the dragon's potential involvement. They both recognized that bringing dragons north would be a monumental decision. She was reluctant to leave her war in the south. Jon insisted that a throne won would be worthless if the realm lay in undead ruin. Tension simmered between them, each one pressing the other for concessions. But there was, beneath it all, a sense of mutual respect. Davos noted it quietly to Tormund, who only snorted that the pretty dragon queen might fancy Jon's dark eyes. News trickled in from ravens bearing conflicting battlefield reports. The Lannister armies had taken losses, but so had Daenerys's forces. King's Landing remained in Cersei's hands. The Riverlands simmered with unrest. The Iron Islands had split between Euron Greyjoy and his niece and nephew, dividing the seas. Meanwhile, the North was mustering, uncertain how soon the White Walkers would strike. Jon's impatience grew by the day. Finally, a fresh ship from White Harbor arrived, captained by an old salt named Garth Waters. The hold was nearly empty, ready to be filled with obsidian for the North. Jon and Davos oversaw the loading, glad for the knowledge that soon they could bring the precious cargo back to Winterfell. On the third day of loading, Daenerys summoned Jon to the highest terrace of Dragonstone, the one that overlooked the sea with a dramatic drop of basalt cliffs. He found her there, a gentle breeze stirring her silver hair. One of the dragons, Regal, she called him, coiled on a rocky ledge. Far below, the sea crashed against the rocks in white foam. Daenerys spoke without turning. "You'll leave soon, I expect. Your ships are nearly loaded." Jon came to stand by her, gazing out at the restless waters. "Yes. I should return to my family, see that the obsidian is crafted into weapons. We need to be ready." She nodded. For a moment, she looked weary, as though countless burdens pressed on her shoulders. "I must decide whether to fly south again or heed your warnings. Tyrion advises me to push for a quick end to the Lannisters, then turn my attention north. I wonder, though, if the White Walkers strike soon, there might be no time for such a plan." Jon felt the weight of it. "I understand your position. But the dead won't wait. They don't care for thrones. At least, if you can spare some portion of your forces, or if you can fly a dragon or two north when we call, it might make a difference between victory and an endless night." She pursed her lips. "I cannot march my unsullied away from the war. My Dothraki would never forgive me for ignoring a chance at glorious battle here. But perhaps I can come with my dragons if the threat is dire. Or send one of them at least. Dragons can move quickly. If what you say is true, even one dragon might tip the balance in a battle against the dead. But it will take proof, Jon Snow, more than just your word and your obsidian. Some in my court still doubt the White Walkers exist at all." Jon swallowed. He thought of how to prove the threat short of presenting a captured White. Then he wondered if they might do exactly that. But time was short. "If you come north and see the army of the dead for yourself, you'll have your proof," he said. "Though I hope it's not too late when that moment arrives." She studied his face. "You are unlike the southern lords who have come to me begging or flattering. You speak only of the realm's greater need. You must care deeply for your people." She paused, eyes briefly flicking over his features. "I respect that." Jon felt a warmth in her tone that made him shift slightly. "I was never raised to rule anything," he admitted. "But the people of the North are my kin, my family, and they're my responsibility. I died defending them once. I'd do it again if I must." Her gaze flickered. "That too, I have heard that you died and returned. In Essos, there are stories of men resurrected by the Lord of Light. If it happened to you, then the world is stranger than I ever imagined." She looked away, the wind catching her hair. "I have come through fire myself thrice, as it happens. Perhaps it is only those who have walked through death who understand what is truly important." He nodded slowly, feeling the space between them heavy with unspoken empathy. She turned, gesturing for him to follow her back inside. The conversation ended there, but a subtle closeness lingered. It was not romance, exactly, but a sense of two leaders who recognized the burden on each other's shoulders. Davos teased him that evening about the way the Queen looked at him, but Jon brushed it off. His only real focus was bringing the obsidian home. At dawn the next day, the final crates were loaded. Daenerys herself came to the docks to see them off, her retinue formed behind her. Melisandre offered a calm smile. Grey Worm watched with silent intensity, apparently measuring every movement. Tormund, for once, was uncharacteristically quiet, perhaps awed by the presence of so many unsullied. Davos bowed politely. Jon approached Daenerys with measured courtesy. "Thank you for allowing us the Dragonglass, Your Grace. This will save countless lives. I only hope we can repay the favor." Daenerys nodded, something like a quiet resolve in her eyes. "When the time comes to fight this Night King you speak of, the realm will need unity more than ever. Do not forget that I seek to rule all of Westeros, including the north. And I do not forget those who stand with me when I need them. She glanced over the ships. I will send a raven if I break the Lannisters' power swiftly. If the threat from the White Walkers is real, you have my word that I will heed your call. That was the best promise Jon could hope for. He bowed and they exchanged a final look. Then he boarded the swift narwhal. The sails filled and the ship glided out into the choppy waters, flanked by another vessel loaded with obsidian as well. As Dragonstone's looming fortress receded into the distance, Jon exhaled, uncertain of what the future held. He felt relief at having accomplished the mission, gratitude that Daenerys had seen reason, and a gnawing worry that perhaps it wouldn't be enough, that the White Walkers might be closing in faster than any of them realized. The voyage north was a test of patience. Storms battered them near Crackclaw Point, forcing them to take shelter for 3 days. Tormund raged at the damned sea while Davos maintained a stoic calm. Jon paced the deck, scanning the horizon for any sign of passing warships, mindful that Euron Greyjoy's fleet was rumored to roam these waters. But the storms kept everyone else at bay. At last, when the weather cleared, the swift narwhal resumed its course. Finally, White Harbor's breakwaters came into view one windy morning, stirring relief among the men. They pulled into port, receiving a hero's welcome of sorts from Manderley's men who had feared the worst after their long absence. Jon wasted no time. He oversaw the unloading of the precious crates, ensuring they were transferred to wagons under guard. Once that was set in motion, he found a quiet moment to send a raven ahead to Winterfell. We have secured the Dragoglass. Expect our arrival shortly. Then he ate a quick meal, parted ways with Manderley, who again swore loyalty to House Stark, and mounted a horse for the final leg of the journey home. A caravan of wagons, each carrying carefully wrapped obsidian, set out behind him. Davos rode by his side. Tormund rode near the front, glancing around as if expecting whites to jump out at any moment. Days later, the high walls of Winterfell appeared before them, banners of House Stark rippling. The gates swung open in greeting. Jon's heart soared with a mixture of relief and dread, for who knew what news awaited him within. The courtyard bustled with new soldiers, their surcoats emblazoned with all manner of northern sigils. Servants rushed to help unload the wagons. Jon dismounted, handing his reins to a stable boy, and scanned the throng for a familiar face. A cry rang out, "Jon!" And there was Sansa hurrying from the great hall in a swirl of gray furs. Robb trailed behind her, grinning, while Ned Stark walked with calm dignity at their side, Catelyn close to him, Rickon trotting along with wide eyes. Jon strode forward, meeting them in the center of the courtyard. Sansa flung her arms around him, ignoring the dust on his cloak. Robb clapped a hand on his shoulder, exclaiming, "Welcome home, brother." Ned offered a warm smile, though sorrow traced the corners of his eyes. "You have done well, Jon. The obsidian you bring might save us all." Catelyn gave him a small nod, her lips trembling with relief. Rickon hovered, excitement shining in his gaze. Jon could not help but smile, though it felt like 1,000 burdens pressed on him. "It's good to be back," he murmured. "I bring news, and there's much we must do." They made their way into the great hall, where fires burned bright and the aroma of roast mutton clung in the air. Servants hurried to bring them refreshment. Tormund, Davos, and the other men followed, grateful for warmth after the cold ride. Lyanna Stark entered from a side passage, appearing as quiet as ever. She offered Jon a faint tilt of her head in greeting. Once they settled, Jon recounted the negotiations with Daenerys Targaryen, describing the dragons and her promise to consider helping the North once her southern war was concluded. Robb listened with furrowed brows. It's a risk to rely on her. She might be lost in the struggle for the throne. Jon nodded. "I told her that if we wait too long, there may be no realm left to rule. She understands, in part, but she also sees the Lannisters as her immediate enemy." Ned exhaled. "We'll proceed with forging arrowheads, spear tips, and blades from the obsidian you've brought. Our blacksmiths have been trained by the men from the wall who once shaped dragonglass. Gendry, the boy who traveled with some of our men from the Brotherhood without banners, has real skill with forging. He's been helping. The entire courtyard has been turned into something of an armory." Catelyn added, "We've had fresh reports from Castle Black. The Whites grow bolder, attacking small outposts near the wall. Men vanish. We can't say how large the White Walker army might be now, but it's clear the time is fast approaching when they will assault us in force." Chills ran down Jon's spine. He thought of Hardhome, the tide of undead surging in unstoppable waves. The quiet great hall, for all its warmth, felt suddenly cold. "Then we must be ready," he said grimly. Every man, woman, boy, or girl who can wield a weapon must do so. We cannot rely on help from the south until it's too late. Weeks turned into a focused rush of preparation. The obsidian was hauled into newly built workshops near the forges. Fires roared day and night as smiths hammered out arrowheads, spear points, and even attempts at forging blades with obsidian edges. Gendry, a strong-limbed youth with short dark hair and a blacksmith's wit, led the effort with surprising confidence, while older masters guided him through advanced techniques. Thousands of arrowheads were shaped. Short spears with obsidian tips were stacked in neat rows. The more delicate forging of swords or axes required intricate layering with metal, but they managed to produce a few passable weapons. The entire castle smelled of molten metal and rock dust, an oddly acrid tang that clung to the air. Outside the forges, the muster of the northern armies intensified. Men from the Rills, the Dreadfort, which had been reclaimed after the Boltons' defeat, Last Hearth, Bear Island, Deepwood Motte, and dozens of smaller keeps arrived in Winterfell's fields. Garrisons from White Harbor brought fresh recruits, some of them decked in fish sigils. Robb and Ned walked through the encampments, greeting old bannermen with quiet pride. Lady Lyanna Mormont personally oversaw a contingent of Bear Island archers, all determined young women who could hit a sparrow in flight at 50 paces. The Umbers brought towering brutes who looked eager for a fight after years of oppression. The entire tapestry of the North seemed to converge under the direwolf banner. Knights found the family in the Great Hall or the Solar discussing final plans. They received sporadic ravens from beyond the wall describing White sightings and urging immediate help. But they dared not ride out blindly. To face the White Walkers in small numbers would be suicide. They needed the full host properly armed to meet the threat together. Tension mounted. Rickon looked wide-eyed whenever talk of the undead arose. Sansa tried to soothe him, quietly reminding him that they were all together now, that House Stark was strong. Catelyn hovered near Ned, uneasy but resolute. Lyanna Stark spent longer hours in the Godwood as though beseeching the old gods for a final chance to save the North. At last, the day came when a horn blast was heard on the horizon near the King's Road. Scouts rode in at a gallop, breathless, telling of White Walkers advancing on the wall in large numbers, possibly a legion of Whites to match or outnumber the combined forces of the Night's Watch and the wildlings who had crossed to the south. Ned convened the War Council at once. The Great Hall was crammed with the Northern Lords. The decision was swift: they would march the entire host to the wall. The plan: fortify Castle Black and Eastwatch, force a confrontation near the open ground so the undead could not simply slip around them. If the White Walkers broke through, their only fallback would be Winterfell. All or nothing in the ancient tradition of the North. The next morning, Winterfell buzzed with organized chaos. Soldiers broke camp. Wagons were loaded with crates of food, tents, dragonglass weapons. The blacksmiths extinguished or banked their fires, ready to move the last shipments of obsidian arrowheads. Eddard Stark, once Lord of Winterfell, now the living proof of a miracle, donned a set of plate reinforced at the joints with stiffened leather, a heavy cloak pinned at his shoulders. He moved with a solemnity that reminded everyone of battles past. Catelyn insisted on riding with him, not as a mere bystander, but as a leader who would rally support from the rear guard. Robb commanded the vanguard. Lyanna Stark and Rickon would remain at Winterfell for safety, some argued, but both refused. Lyanna pointedly strapped a sword to her side. Rickon looked defiant, though Sansa and Catelyn worried for him. In the end, Ned compromised. Rickon would stay close to Mother, under guard, out of direct combat if possible. Sansa took charge of the traveling household, coordinating supply lines and runners. She, too, would ride north, determined to do her part. It felt as though the entire North was uprooting. Thousands poured onto the roads, forming a great column that snaked across the frozen fields. Snow drifted gently, dusting men's cloaks, turning the world a pale gray. Horses snorted clouds of vapor. Banners swayed in the wind, dire wolves, bears, mermen, all marching side by side. Jon rode near Ned and Robb at the head of the column. Ghost padded alongside, his silent presence a comfort. Tormund joined them, eager to reunite with the wildlings. Ser Davos brought up a smaller contingent, watchful as ever. The first few days of marching were tense but uneventful. They passed towns where small folk peered out from shuttered windows, fear heavy in their eyes. At each stop, Ned or Robb offered reassurance, telling them to flee south if the battle was lost or to stay and hold the holdfast if victory was within reach. They could not force peasants to the front lines. Many wept, pressing crusts of bread or meager offerings into the soldiers' hands in gratitude or desperation. Eventually, the air grew sharper. The sun, already faint in the sky, seemed to lose more warmth with each passing league. Frozen forests surrounded them, creaking with the weight of ice. John felt an inexplicable chill in his bones, recalling how the White Walkers brought their own cold with them. Each night, the northern host made camp, building large fires that ringed the perimeter. Men huddled in cloaks, whispering of old wives' tales. No living man present had ever fought an entire legion of the dead, only John had glimpsed a fraction of that horror at Harhome. He tried to warn them, but words fell short of capturing the raw terror. Near the 5th day, scouts galloped back from the front, voices shaking, white spotted near the Queen's Gate. The watch is engaging them at the wall's base. They've set up a defensive perimeter, but they're outnumbered. They need reinforcements now. The host quickened its pace, lines of horses picking up to a trot, foot soldiers grimly setting their jaws as they marched double time. Supplies rattled in wagons. Breath plumed in the frigid air. Anxiety rippled through the ranks, but also a grim determination. The day of reckoning had come. At last, they crested a ridge and beheld the wall looming ahead, a sheer slab of ice glinting under a cloudy sky. Castle Black sprawled at its base, lights flickering on the ramparts. Men swarmed below. In the distance, an open plain stretched, dotted with thousands of shapes that moved irregularly like ants. John's blood ran cold. He recognized the swaying, jerky movements, whites and undead ho. Ride arrayed before the wall. The White Walkers themselves, tall and eerie, could be glimpsed on skeletal horses, prowling at the edges. A faint sound drifted on the wind, an unearthly groaning, as though the land itself wept. A rallying cry arose from the northern host. Banners rose. Drums rumbled. Rob barked orders, instructing cavalry to wheel around the flank while foot soldiers formed ranks in the center. Archers readied their dragonglass arrows. Tormund, exultant in savage glee, roared to the men of the free folk who recognized him. Ned, face grim, directed half the army to secure Castle Black's perimeter so the whites could not slip around them. John readied Longclaw, its Valyrian steel glinting with the faint embedded swirl that might, with luck, kill a walker. Ghost snarled softly at his side. As the northern army advanced, the white horde turned, drawn by the sound and scent of living flesh. A hush fell, as though the entire world held its breath. Then the dead began to surge forward, their numbers staggering, thousands upon thousands. Some wore tattered remnants of clothes, others were just bones, clacking. Their eyes glowed with pale malevolence. From behind them, cold figures on undead horses raised long spears of ice, commanding the dead with silent will. For a heartbeat, fear stabbed every living soul. Then horns blew from Castle Black. The northern cavalry thundered forth, steel-shod hooves churning the snow. Archers loosed a volley of obsidian-tipped arrows. Black shafts arced overhead, hissing down onto the whites. Where they struck, undead shapes collapsed, the magic animating them shattered by dragonglass. A ragged cheer erupted, soon cut off by the sheer volume of the whites that kept coming. Swords clashed, men screamed, the great confrontation unfolding in a swirl of chaos. John found himself in the thick of it, slashing at whites that lunged forward with tooth and nail. Longclaw bit into rotting flesh, severing limbs or splitting skulls. Each contact with the Valyrian steel caused them to crumple. Ghost darted around, leaping at undead throats. Nearby, Tormund swung a massive axe with obsidian inlaid, toppling half a dozen whites. The ground became slick with foul-smelling fluids. Soldiers cried out, some overrun by the unstoppable wave of dead. Others regrouped, forming shield walls to fend off the press. Arrows continued to fall, but soon it was too close for archers to risk hitting their own men. Robb Stark led a cavalry charge that punched through one flank, scattering whites into piles of bones and rotting limbs. But the tide threatened to encircle them, more whites clambering over the fallen. Ned Stark fought near the center, calm and deadly, as if each sword thrust was a carefully measured act. Catelyn was held back in the rearguard with Rickon, but she dispatched men with orders to secure the baggage lines from stray whites. Sansa, from a vantage point near the castle gates, helped direct archers to concentrated pockets of undead. Amid the swirling battle, the weather turned. Clouds thickened overhead. Snow began to fall faster, and the wind howled. John recognized that chill. The White Walkers were coming closer. With a burst of adrenaline, he fought his way through ranks of whites, fending off grasping skeletal hands. He saw one of the walkers at a distance, tall, gaunt, with pale skin like ice, carrying a spear that radiated cold. It turned its head, hollow eyes fixing on John. Then it kicked its undead horse, gliding forward with unnatural speed. Men around John cried out as the walker approached. One foolhardy warrior swung a normal steel sword at it, only for the blade to shatter on contact with the icy spear. The walker impaled him with a single thrust, then cast him aside. Its gaze shifted to John, as if sensing the Valyrian steel in his hand. John steadied his grip on Longclaw, swallowing terror. He remembered Harhome, the monstrous strength of these beings. But he was not the same man he had been then, and the living were not alone this time. They squared off, the wind whipping around them. Snow stung John's eyes. The walker lunged, spear whistling. John parried with Longclaw. Ice met Valyrian steel in a screeching clash that sparked ghostly shards of frost in the air. The force jarred John's arms, but he held firm, recalling every fight he had survived. The walker hissed, thrusting again with inhuman precision. John sidestepped, slashing at its torso. The blade cut deep, and the walker shrieked in a soundless fury, stepping back with an eerie, halting motion. Frigid blood, if it could be called that, spilled in a slushy stream. John pressed his advantage, ignoring the swirl of whites that battered at him from the side. Ghost lunged in, snapping at the walker's legs. The creature raised its spear overhead. John caught a glimpse of those icy, hateful eyes. Then he drove Longclaw through the walker's ribcage. The walker stiffened, trembling, before shattering like brittle ice, scattering shards across the snow. A wave of cold air swept outward. A ragged cheer arose from nearby soldiers who saw the kill. But the battle was far from won. More walkers appeared, commanding waves of whites that clambered up from every direction. At Castle Black's walls, a break formed where a chunk of the old palisade gave way, letting whites pour in. Chaos reigned, men fighting in pockets, cut off from their commanders. The sky darkened further. John fought his way toward Ned, glimpsing Robb's cavalry embroiled in a savage melee. Tormund's roar sounded, then fell silent in the din. Suddenly, from the east, shrieks of terror rang out. A new wave of undead had come from that flank. The living line buckled. Sansa, who had been near the castle gates, was forced to retreat inside. Catelyn, riding amid the rearguard, frantically called for men to hold the line. Rickon, wide-eyed on a horse behind her, looked ready to bolt. The situation teetered. If the living lost cohesion, the dead would swarm them. Then came a faint cry from the sky. John looked up, heart leaping. A roar, unmistakable, resonated through the driving snow. In the swirling gray clouds, a shape appeared, a dragon. Then another, and a third, wings beating the storm. Flames lit the sky. Men cheered in disbelief. Daenerys Targaryen had come. The largest dragon, Drogon, descended with a thunderous shriek. Flame burst from his maw, lancing down into the densest cluster of whites. Bodies ignited, turning the field into an inferno. Another dragon strafed the east flank with fire, clearing a path for the living to regroup. The third soared overhead, scattering whites that had begun to climb the castle walls. Through the smoke and snow, John glimpsed Daenerys astride Drogon, guiding him in wide arcs, unleashing jets of flame upon the undead. The arrival of dragons galvanized the living. A renewed shout rose up from the North's forces. Swords clashed with fresh vigor. Arrows took flight, laced with dragoglass. The whites caught in the open field burned by the hundreds, their unholy shrieks drowned out by the roar of dragonfire. Several White Walkers tried to rally them, but one was targeted by a swooping dragon's fury, blasted apart in an explosion of ice shards. Daenerys spotted Jon below, locked in combat with a cluster of whites that pressed in. She guided Drogon to strafe the area, careful not to hit allies. Flames roared at the ground, incinerating the undead. Jon collapsed to his knees, panting, half-burned by the heat, but alive. He looked up at the dragon's massive shape overhead, gratitude and awe-flooding him. On the castle ramparts, archers picked off whites that attempted to scale the walls. The tide was shifting. Ned and Robb rallied their troops, driving forward in a wedge that cut down the remaining whites around Castle Black's courtyard. Tormund reappeared, bloodied but grinning savagely, leading a group of wildlings in a vicious counterattack. Davos directed several groups of men to sweep the perimeter, ensuring no stragglers remained. Catelyn held Rickon close as they advanced cautiously, scouring the battlefield for survivors. The scene was horrific, heaps of corpses, living and dead intermingled, snow stained red and black. Still, the undead ranks were broken, many burned to ash. The White Walkers had either been slain or had retreated, for none remained visible among the shattered whites. Jon peered into the swirling storm, suspecting the Night King might be out there. But for now, the field belonged to the living. Daenerys circled overhead on Drogon, scanning for any pockets of resistance. When none remained, she guided the dragon to land near the castle walls with a thunderous impact, spooking the horses. Men stumbled back in fear as the massive creature folded its wings. Daenerys slid down from the saddle, stepping onto the icy ground, her breath forming clouds. She surveyed the aftermath, eyes heavy with the horror of war. Then she spotted Jon, staggering from the front lines, and strode toward him. He bowed his head, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "You came," he managed, voice hoarse. "You saved us." She studied him for a moment, as though uncertain what to say. Then she said quietly, "I saw it in the flames, the undead. Tyrion and I both knew we had to come. We flew north as soon as we heard you marched." Her gaze flicked to the bodies strewn about. "I only hope we were in time." Jon swallowed. "We were losing. You turned the tide." He paused, glancing at Drogon, who rumbled softly, the heat of his body melting the snow around him. "Thank you. Your Grace." Daenerys' expression softened. "It seems the realm has a threat greater than any Iron Throne or Lannister. If I am to rule Westeros, I must defend it. This is only the beginning, isn't it?" Jon looked out at the bleak wastes beyond the wall. "The Night King is still out there. This was one battle, but the war goes on. For now, though, we have a victory. A moment to breathe." As if summoned by those words, Ned, Robb, Sansa, Catelyn, and Rickon approached, accompanied by an escort of Northerners. They, too, gazed at Daenerys with mingled gratitude and wariness. Ned stepped forward, wearing battered armor, his sword dripping blackened gore. "You have our thanks, Daenerys Targaryen," he said in a grave tone. "House Stark owes you a debt for what you've done here." Daenerys inclined her head, her voice measured. "I did only what was necessary. Our true enemy is the Night King, not each other. If we do not stand together, we will all fall." Catelyn gave a thin, grateful smile. Sansa's gaze lingered on the dragons, while Rickon stared openly, half in wonder, half in fear. Robb, adrenaline still pumping, tried to speak, but only managed a ragged breath, pressing a fist to his chest in respect. Then Tormund stomped up, wiping undead ichor from his beard, declaring, "We fought well together, Dragon Queen. Your flying lizard roasts these corpses nicely." Daenerys arched a brow at his bluntness, but allowed a small smile. "I'm pleased you appreciate our efforts, wildling." In the distance, other men cheered as they realized the threat had been driven back. The stink of burned flesh and the whimper of dying horses marred the air. Already, the living hastened to gather the wounded. Whites that still twitched were hacked apart or burned with torches. A somber hush settled, the cost of victory all too evident. Ned surveyed the countless dead with a haunted look. He had seen war in his first life, but to stand again amidst such carnage weighed heavily. Night closed in, bringing bitter cold. Fires burned in rings around the campsite, men piling the white corpses to ensure they did not rise again. Inside Castle Black's hall, the Starks and their closest allies gathered with Daenerys and her retinue. Tyrion Lannister, smaller and sharper-eyed than Jon expected, joined them, along with Grey Worm and a few Dothraki bloodriders who seemed both intrigued and uneasy at the vastness of the northern snows. The meeting was subdued, with the battered survivors warming themselves by the hearth, silent in exhaustion. Jon reported to Daenerys that they had likely destroyed a significant portion of the Night King's vanguard. However, the king himself was nowhere to be found. The real war might lie further north, in some hidden stronghold of ice and darkness. Tyrion sipped from a flask of strong wine, shaking his head. "I never imagined we'd see the day we fight an army of corpses. All our southern squabbles feel petty by comparison." Ned gazed into the flames. "If the Night King builds another army, we must be ready. Winterfell is the best stronghold in the north. We may have to rally all our forces there, or even attempt an expedition beyond the wall to find and destroy him. Though that would be a perilous undertaking." Daenerys exchanged a look with Jon. "My dragons can only do so much. They are formidable, but if the Night King has powers we do not fully understand, we must proceed with caution." She paused, then spoke with uncharacteristic humility. "It was only by fortune and the goodwill of House Stark that we arrived in time. If House Stark is willing, we can face the next threat together." Robb, slumped in his seat, rubbed at a bruised shoulder. "We are with you. We fight for the living." Catelyn's hand rested protectively on Rickon's arm. She glanced at Ned, and a silent understanding passed between them. They had already paid the price of death once, they would not flee now. Lyanna Stark stood by the edge of the room, listening. She had participated in the earlier fight, silent but deadly with a sword etched with dragon glass shards. Now she finally spoke, her voice low. We Starks have been given a second life. We must protect this realm or there is no justice in our resurrection. The North stands with Daenerys Targaryen as an ally so long as she never betrays that cause. Daenerys bowed her head in acknowledgement. I understand. This is no time for betrayal. Let us stand united until the Night King is destroyed. A sense of cautious hope filled the chamber. Men offered toasts with watered wine or mead. The victory, as bloody as it was, had given them a glimpse that the living could prevail. Jon caught Ned's eye, recalling how distant this possibility had seemed when they first learned of the White Walkers. Now, father and son, mother and daughters, a resurrected house, and a queen with dragons all worked in concert. It was a fragile alliance, but it might be the best chance the realm would ever have. In the days that followed, they buried their dead or burned them to ensure they would not rise again. Castle Black's yard became a place of grim ceremony. Night's Watch brothers, wildlings, northerners, Dothraki, and Unsullied all participated in mass pyres. Snow drifted over the solemn gatherings, ashes drifting upward into the gray sky. The living ate sparingly of the rations, nursed their wounds, and shared stories of close escapes and unimaginable horrors. Some stared in awe whenever the dragons roared from the courtyard, their scaled heads devouring charred goat carcasses. Little by little, a plan took shape. Scouts would travel beyond the wall, searching for any sign of the Night King's next move. The combined forces, battered though they were, would remain near the fortress, continuing to fortify the wall's defenses. Meanwhile, Daenerys and her dragons might need to return south briefly to ensure no Lannister resurgence threatened the supply lines from the rest of Westeros. But she vowed she would return swiftly if the threat beyond the wall stirred again. Jon, Ned, and the rest of the Starks debated whether to push further north to find and destroy the Night King before he rebuilt his army. Robb argued that a decisive strike might prevent a bigger war. Tormund believed the risk was too great. Beyond the wall lay endless frozen tundra, haunted forests, and the domain of the dead. They might find themselves surrounded. Ultimately, Ned decided they should wait for more intelligence. The realm had scarcely recovered from this recent battle. Charging into the unknown might lead to disaster. Daenerys, too, counseled caution, wanting to keep her dragons safe from any potential ambush. So they waited, forging a precarious peace near the edge of the world, living side by side with a queen's retinue of southern forces. Occasionally, tension flared. Dothraki riders clashed with wildlings over hunting rights. Unsullied stared in stoic confusion at the old gods' weirwoods. But Tyrion and Davos worked tirelessly to broker small compromises, while Sansa and Melisandre managed the distribution of supplies. In the midst of this lull, Jon found a chance to speak privately with Ned and Lyanna Stark. They gathered in the old commander's tower at Castle Black, the narrow windows rattling in the wind. Ned stood at the window looking out at the bleak northern horizon. Lyanna hovered behind him, arms folded around herself. Jon cleared his throat, unsure how to begin. Father, he said quietly, I've never doubted your love, or that you raised me as your own, but, after everything I've seen, and after what Melisandre hinted, I cannot escape the feeling there's more to my parentage than I understand. Ned turned, sorrow etched on his face. Lyanna's expression tensed. The hush extended, broken only by the wind outside. At length, Ned spoke, voice trembling slightly. Jon, I made a promise. A promise to my sister on her deathbed many years ago before Robert's rebellion ended. She had just given birth to you. Jon's world tilted. He gripped the edge of a table to steady himself, scarcely breathing. Lyanna looked as though tears threatened. Ned continued, each word weighed with regret. She was Rhaegar Targaryen's wife in secret. Their union was not what Robert believed. When Robert's forces approached, she was hidden in the Tower of Joy, and she gave birth to a son. She made me swear to protect you, for Robert and the realm would have killed any Targaryen child. To save your life, I hid the truth, calling you my bastard. I dishonored myself to keep you safe. Jon closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a rush of realization. Rhaegar Targaryen's son, Daenerys Targaryen's nephew, the rightful heir. Did that make him a claimant to the Iron Throne? The swirl of thoughts hammered his mind. But the sense of who he was, a Stark in everything but name, also pressed forward. He opened his eyes, meeting Ned's anguished gaze. You carried this secret for so many years. Ned nodded, tears brimming. I'm sorry for the pain it caused you. I thought it was the only way. Jon looked at Lyanna, who reached out tentatively. "I never meant to leave you," she whispered. "I died. I don't even remember it well, only the sense of heartbreak and blood. But I wanted you to be safe. Ned was the only one I trusted." Jon's breath shuddered. He tried to gather his thoughts. I have Targaryen blood, then. This entire time I've been. If the realm knew, Daenerys might see me as a threat to her claim. Or perhaps an ally. I don't want the throne. I only want to protect the living." He let out a shaky laugh. "The irony. My father was a Targaryen, yet I've spent months forging an alliance with my aunt." Ned took his hand. "You are still a Stark, no matter your blood. You have our name in spirit, if not by law. That doesn't change." Jon embraced them both, tears slipping unheeded. It was a moment of raw emotion. They had faced death, returned, fought side by side. Yet only now did the final secret come to light. The knowledge left Jon both liberated and burdened. He whispered, "I will not claim any throne. If Daenerys must be queen to rally the realm, I won't stand in her way. But I also won't lie to her if it threatens our alliance. The truth might cause rifts." Lyanna pressed her forehead to Jon's. "Do what you must, my child. The realm needs unity. That is all I ever wanted." Over the next few days, the secret weighed on Jon's mind. He debated telling Daenerys. Tyrion might counsel her in unpredictable ways. And how would the North react? But the threat of the Night King overshadowed all else. He decided to wait, uncertain if revealing the truth would splinter their fragile alliance. For now, the living had one goal: to end the threat of the dead. If the knowledge of Jon's parentage could help that cause, he would share it. Otherwise, he would carry this burden until the war was won. In those quiet days at Castle Black, as men built new watchtowers and patrolled the battered fields of the recent battle, the uneasy calm settled. Daenerys waited with her dragons, occasionally flying short patrols beyond the wall. Sansa and Tyrion formed a surprising rapport, discussing strategy by the flickering torchlight. Ned spent hours with the Night's Watch, sharing his knowledge. Robb refined the Northern Forces training. Catelyn comforted the wounded. Rickon tried to put on a brave face, but each night he awoke from nightmares of whites clawing at him. Lyanna Stark lingered near the weirwood trees and along the ramparts, watchful and silent. Then, one dawn, a horn blast echoed from the Northern Watch. Men scrambled to vantage points. Through the morning mist, a shape stumbled out of the tree-lean, an emaciated figure draped in ragged furs. Archers aimed, suspecting a white, but the figure raised both hands, calling in a hoarse voice. Jon rushed to the gate with Tormund. They recognized the newcomer, a free folk scout named Morna. She collapsed, gasping for water. Soldiers carried her inside, setting her by the fire in the common hall. There, she croaked out her story. The Night King was on the move again, further north, gathering an even larger force from hidden places, resurrecting every corpse he could find. Some rumored he had a massive ice dragon, though that might be a wild tale. Morna insisted the White Walkers would strike again soon, possibly before the living could regroup. "He's raising an army bigger than any man has seen," she gasped. "They'll come in a storm. You might have days, or maybe a fortnight, but no more." A hush of dread fell on those who heard her. So the real conflict was near. The next blow from the Night King might be unstoppable. Daenerys, upon hearing it, resolved to stay in the north, deciding that the southern war mattered less than preserving the living. Tyrion sent ravens to any southern allies who might come. The final confrontation loomed. Ned and Daenerys gathered the war council in Castle Black Solar. Maps covered the table. The only question remained: how to meet this unstoppable tide. A direct assault into the heart of the ice fields was suicide, but waiting at the wall might allow the Night King to flank them from the west or east. Sansa suggested using the dragons as a mobile force to strike at the White Walkers directly. Tormund argued that the living should lure the undead into a kill zone near the gorge. Davos quietly cautioned that the living armies were still exhausted. Another full-scale battle might break them. Daenerys stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the hilt of a short blade. "We must end the Night King himself. Without him, the whites will fall. My dragons can help, but we need to corner him." Jon recalled Harhome, how the Night King had looked upon him with a silent challenge. He thought of his Targaryen blood, though he had not spoken it aloud. A plan took shape. If the dragons could isolate the Night King, if Jon or Daenerys or any warrior with Valyrian steel or dragonglass could strike him, they might shatter the entire undead force. But how to orchestrate that moment? In the end, they agreed on a bold gambit. They would bait the Night King by moving out from the wall in a large formation, drawing the horde into an open field near an old cluster of hills known as the Frostfang's Edge. Once there, Daenerys's dragons and a strike team led by Jon and Robb would attempt to assault the Night King directly. It was a desperate plan, reliant on timing and luck. But no one had a better idea. Thus, the final muster began. Every able-bodied soldier, be they from the north, the free folk, or Daenerys's host, prepared for the march. Supplies were rationed carefully. The cold bit deeper as they ventured into the open wastes beyond the wall. Fog and swirling flurries turned days into gray monotony. At night, the men huddled in circles around the fire, telling gallows humor or reciting old prayers. The dragons soared overhead, watchful silhouettes in the clouded skies. At last, they reached the chosen field. It was a wide expanse of snow and ice ringed by low hills. A frozen river cut across part of it, forging a natural barrier. There they waited, forming ranks, building temporary ramparts of packed snow and sharpened stakes. Tormund scouted northward with a group of free folk, each day returning with more ominous news. White sightings, phantom shapes at dusk, the echo of monstrous footsteps in the night. The tension rose to a near-breaking point. On the dawn of the seventh day, it happened. The wind intensified, the temperature plummeted. Men who had grown used to the north's cold shivered uncontrollably. The sky turned an iron gray. Then, from beyond the hills, the White Walkers appeared. First a few, then a dozen, then hundreds, each flanked by legions of whites. The outnumbered living drew in a gasp. Even with Daenerys's dragons, this was a near-impossible foe. But the men held fast, the memory of their last victory fueling them. Ned Stark, astride a horse at the front line, set his jaw, gripping his sword. Robb, at his side, raised his blade high, rallying the men. Jon, with Ghost close by, positioned himself near Daenerys, who waited with Drogon perched on a ridge behind the main line. The other two dragons circled overhead, scaring the snow into drifting vortexes. Tormund and the free folk flanked to the left, while the Unsullied and Dothraki stood to the right. It was a patchwork of fighters from every corner of the realm. A stillness fell over the field. Then the White Walkers advanced, the whites surging forward in a ragged wave. Drums pounded. Horns blared from the living lines. The final battle erupted. Arrows streaked the sky, cutting down the first wave of whites. Dragon fire spewed from above, torching swathes of the undead. But the horde kept coming, unstoppable. Men formed shield walls, thrusting dragonglass spears. The air filled with screams, clashing steel, the hiss of flame. Walkers rode into the fray on dead horses, striking men down with icy weapons. One of Daenerys's dragons soared low, unleashing a massive jet of fire that scorched the center of the undead formation. Dozens, hundreds of whites fell, but there were always more. The living line buckled under the sheer weight of numbers. Robb galloped along the flank, trying to maintain order, but a swarm of whites dragged men from their horses. Tormund bellowed curses, hacking down foes, only to be battered by skeletal arms. Grey Worm led a disciplined, unsullied phalanx that speared whites in formation, but even they wavered under the onslaught. Jon craned his neck, searching for the Night King. He spotted a tall, ominous shape moving among the White Walkers at the rear, clad in black ice armor. Daenerys saw it too. She urged Drogon to launch into the sky, beckoning Jon to mount behind her. He hesitated only a moment before climbing onto the dragon's back. Ghost forced to remain below, howling in frustration. The great beast flapped its colossal wings, lifting them into the swirling storm. From above, Jon saw the entire battlefield. An ocean of writhing whites, small pockets of living men desperately fighting. The Night King stood out, commanding the undead with silent authority. Daenerys dove Drogon toward him. Streams of flame rained down, scorching the whites around the Night King. But he raised one gaunt hand, channeling some unholy power that seemed to repel the fire. The flames parted, leaving him unscathed. Daenerys cursed. She wheeled Drogon around for another pass. This time, the Night King hurled a spear of ice at them, narrowly missing. Drogon roared in rage. Jon clutched at the saddle, heart pounding. They needed a direct confrontation, steel against ice. Below, the lines began to break. Ned fought valiantly with a circle of northerners, but even he was pressed back by relentless whites. Rob's cavalry regrouped for a final charge. Sansa and Catelyn were with the rearguard, rallying archers. Rickon, protected by guards, stared at the chaos in horror. Arya was still missing from these fields, but every other Stark was present, risking a second death. Ghost bounded among the swirling mass, ripping at undead throats. Daenerys descended once more, this time aiming to land near the Night King, so Jon could engage him. As Drogon's talons touched down, the undead parted, forming a ring. The Night King stood in the center, pale eyes glittering with malevolence. Jon slid from the dragon's back, brandishing Longclaw. Daenerys tried to flame the Night King again, but the creature deflected the fire with a swirl of icy wind. Realizing the futility, she kept Drogon ready, in case the whites closed in. Jon advanced on the Night King, recalling the plan. If he could kill him, the entire undead army might fall. The Night King stared, expressionless, then drew a blade of shimmering ice. Jon lunged, steel met ice, sparks of unnatural energy flickered. Cold radiated from the Night King, sapping Jon's strength with each parry. But Jon had Valyrian steel, and a fierce resolve fueled by everything he'd lost. The clash of swords rang over the din. Each blow jolted Jon's arms. The Night King moved with supernatural speed. They locked swords. The Night King's hollow gaze bored into Jon's. Then, with a burst of force, he shoved Jon back. Jon stumbled, nearly falling over a frozen corpse. The Night King thrust again, aiming to pierce Jon's chest. Jon rolled aside, swinging wildly. The blade scored a hit across the Night King's side, but the being barely flinched. Daenerys watched helplessly from Drogon's back, not daring to unleash more fire. The swirling combat continued, a deadly dance on the icy ground. With a final surge, the Night King disarmed Jon, sending Longclaw flying. Jon gasped, unarmed, as the Night King raised his ice blade for a killing stroke. But at that moment, a figure appeared at the Night King's flank, sword raised. Ned Stark. He had seen Jon in peril and forced his way through the horde to assist. With a yell, Ned plunged a dragonglass dagger into the Night King's back. The creature reeled, hissing, momentarily off balance. Jon seized his chance, scrambling for Longclaw. He grabbed the hilt, rolled to his feet, and drove the Valyrian steel through the Night King's chest from the front as Ned's dagger remained buried in his back. Piercing shriek tore the air. The Night King's eyes flared with icy light, then shattered into shards. Its body cracked, fracturing like a frozen statue, and exploded into a burst of icy debris that scattered across the ground. The shriek reverberated. All around the battlefield, whites convulsed, their magic severed. They collapsed by the thousands, leaving only piles of rotting remains or bones. White walkers disintegrated, and the entire undead horde fell into lifeless heaps. The roar of battle diminished into stunned silence as men realized the onslaught had ceased. They had won. Jon stared at the ground where the Night King had stood, breath ragged. Ned stood nearby, face ashen, still gripping the hilt of the dagger. The father and son locked eyes, then embraced in raw relief, ignoring the shards of ice that clung to their armor. Above them, Daenerys dismounted Drogon, stepping carefully among the fallen bones. The living across the battlefield began to cheer, or weep, or sink to their knees in exhaustion. Dragons roared triumphantly overhead, the final note in an impossible victory. Robb galloped up on a lathered horse, dismounting to see the collapsed whites. Sansa, Catelyn, and Rickon followed under guard, wide-eyed at the carnage. Tormund let out a whoop of savage joy. Grey Worm raised his spear, the Unsullied lifting their voices in stoic triumph. It was over. The Great War had been won. The White Walkers were no more, their master destroyed by a Stark sword on the icy field of the far north. Amid the swirling remnants of snow and ash, the Starks gathered together in a trembling circle, Eddard, Catelyn, Robb, Sansa, Rickon, Jon, and Lyanna, all alive despite fate. They could scarcely believe it themselves. Daenerys approached quietly, her dragons landing behind her. She gazed at them with a new respect, this ancient family who had defied death itself. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ned, his voice raw with emotion, said softly, "The North is free. All men are free now from the threat of the dead. May we never forget the cost." Jon exhaled, feeling an impossible weight lift from his soul. He caught Daenerys's eye, thinking of the truth he carried about his Targaryen heritage. Perhaps that battle would be his next test. But for now, in this moment of shared relief and unity, he felt a warmth in his chest. The living had triumphed, House Stark had reclaimed its rightful place, and Daenerys Targaryen had fulfilled the role of protector she had long claimed. They all had a second chance. A hush fell as the wind died, the storms receding. Men began to gather the wounded, comfort the dying. The dragons roared one last time, echoing across the white expanse. And in that echo, one might imagine the old gods and the new, the Lord of Light and every other power, acknowledging what had happened here. The long night had been halted by the courage of the living, by the synergy of a resurrected family, by a queen and her dragons, and by the unshakable will to protect all that was precious. House Stark stood strong, as it always had, now more than ever, in the harsh domain of ice and snow. And though many challenges remained for Westeros in that moment, with the night's darkness banished, the promise of a new dawn seemed not just a distant hope but a glorious certainty.